And we have the owl on, which is awesome.
Okay. Let me go ahead and start your PowerPoint. So will you introduce yourself while I get this set up?
So can you guys hear me if I speak about this level, or do I need to yell louder?
It's good.
It's good, okay, good. My name is Foss, and I am an urban wildlife biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And our office, we kind of work this whole area, this whole county region, I should say, mostly Harris County. Our office is at Shelby Lake State Park. So we share office space with State Park staff. I am also your chapter advisor for Texas Parks and Wildlife. So you'll see me around. And I'm glad you guys are here. So very, very awesome. Today, I'm covering the urban systems chapter in your book. How many of y'all took the time to actually sit and read? Awesome! Yes, way to go. Very good.
Okay, let me move that. Yeah, we're having technical
Challenges.
Yes, we are. Okay, you do this.
Sorry, y'all online. We'll get it fixed.
We're gonna get this.
Okay, so urban systems is urban ecology. It's also how wildlife and habitats are affected by urbanization. So my chapter is not the most fun one to teach. And I will say you will probably get depressed. I'm sorry at the very beginning, but I'm warning you ahead of time.
Yeah, where do you want it? Yes, let's put the owl. Can put him right here. There we go. Will you pull? Oh, okay.
Yeah, where do you want me to stand first?
So
they can see and I won't get swayed.
Just where you were.
Okay.
Just watch your cable. The owl is awake. He just hoo.
All righty.
Let me share the screen because I forgot.
Okay. So, we'll get set here in a sec, guys.
Bobby, are you seeing this?
Computers are supposed to make your life easier.
They
Or
definitely make it more
technology.
exciting, right?
Oh, it gets your heart, your heart
My
beating a little faster.
This is my cardio for the day. Okay, you've got it, Bobby?
Yay.
We're good?
Yeah, I see the urban systems, yes.
Okay,
Okay. that's
good
fine.
deal. All right, so urbanization. Give me the definition. So if you go to some of the dictionaries, it's the process of becoming urban. Okay, that doesn't help much, right? It deals with population in a smaller, more compact area, right? So you're building up the population in a certain area. There's usually less green space in an urbanizing area, unless the community is very forward thinking, right? Mostly what I see in Harris County is this. There's not much green space there, which is kind of a challenge when you're a biologist, a wildlife biologist. It's like, where's the wildlife? Or we end up dealing with grackles or something that can handle this kind of a situation. So yeah, definitely working in an urbanizing area is a challenge. And unfortunately, our part of Texas is becoming much more urban. I saw some information, gosh, it was probably 10 years ago, about Montgomery County and where development would be happening. And they looked at the forest areas, now versus 2030. And I was shocked because most of the forest areas were like gone. So it kind of shocked me, and I thought, no, they must have it wrong. we're seeing it happen now, right? I mean, we're seeing development happen now. And so it's going to be up to us right now to try and encourage developers to leave some green space, leave some forest. So anyway, that's my message for today. Okay, we're done, right? All right, so let's talk about some of the stuff in your chapter. Some of the things that are happening during an urbanizing process, and how maybe we can work better on this. All right, so I go to nature to be soothed and healed and to have my senses put in tune once again. It's a quote by John Burroughs. And am I in your way? I'm totally blocking. Okay. I love this picture because it reminds me of a trip I took to Maine, and I was sitting out on a dock at night. You know how you just kind of stretch out on the wooden dock and you hear the waves and the water, and it's so wonderful. And I'm looking up at the stars. And the reason I was looking up was because the space station was supposed to be going over soon, right? So I was waiting for it to come over. But I realized pretty quickly, I don't have this at home. I can't see the stars anymore. My neighborhood has so much light pollution now. I can barely see the planets, but I can't really see the stars. And every once in a while, when it clears off, and the clouds are no more overhead, you can see a few stars. But I realized how special this is. Mm-hmm.
Isn't it in April that everybody's supposed to turn on their porch lights?
Yeah.
For the migrating birds?
Yeah, any kind of especially the big office buildings and things like that, turning off those lights because it disorients the birds when they're flying through, migrating through. I know, wouldn't that be wonderful? A lot of it is the big parking lot lights. So the big Walmart parking lots or, whatever that don't have their lights shielded. Some of the worst offenders are the gas stations that, have the great big bright lights and they're just shining everywhere. And so if we just put a cap over the top of the light, so it blocks the light from going up, but forces the light to go down. We call that a shielded light. And that works so much better because it directs the light downward and not upward and doesn't block your light so much or your sky so much, sorry. Anyway, most master naturalists, I will say, this appeals to them, this quote. Is it true for y'all?
Yes.
So when you get upset, when you get stressed, when you have, negative things happen to you in your life, do you look out on a green space? Do you walk outside and take a deep breath? Do you go to a park or something like that, to kind of cool down and breathe in the nature, right? I do. At my office, I have a window that looks out on green space. So all I have to do is turn my chair and look out and, I just got finished with somebody on the phone and I'm breathing in the nature. I'm seeing nature. Anyway, this is true for most of us, most people across the board. It's not just master naturalists, but there's a lot of people that don't realize this, right? So they're very stressed out and they don't know how to get rid of that stress. But anyway. This one?
Not going?
Not going.
Do it again. There we go.
Okay, yeah. So there have been some researchers, some doctors and some other researchers that have looked into this whole nature phenomena and how it benefits people. And one of the handouts that I brought is a somewhat newer research paper on how it affects mental health. So nature and mental health. And it's in the back of the room. There's plenty, when you're ready to pick it up. So in 1999, there was I'm going to back up here so I can read the screen. So there was a doctor that found that 2/3 of people choose a natural setting to retreat to when stressed. So not an urban setting, not a built up setting, but a natural setting. I would think that would also include some of our more manicured parks and things like that, because, you know, it's all in how you perceive it. And then many studies after a stressful event show that nature, just looking at nature is important. So how many of y'all have been to a medical center, a hospital, a doctor's office lately? How many have noticed that several doctors, several of those places now put some kind of a natural scene, a picture on the wall? I especially appreciate it if they put it where they're taking your blood, right? That gets me stressed. But give me something pretty to look at, you know, even if it's a dog, you know, a kid with a dog, or a bird, or a green leaf, you know, something that always seems to help. And they found out, yeah, that's true. So just viewing something natural, within 3 to 4 minutes, your blood pressure, respiration rate, brain activity, and the production of stress hormones all decrease. Isn't that amazing? Just from looking at a picture. You don't have to actually be in nature. It's just looking at a picture. So keep that in mind when decorating your house, right? Keep it all de-stressful. And then the other important thing about natural spaces, any kind of a green space, is that it gives wildlife a place to go. So many times we're like, oh, you know, we're putting our house here, but we don't want that kind of wildlife, right? We don't want that armadillo. We don't want that coyote or whatever, right? But we need some place for them to go. So having some of those little green spaces, those little pockets of green area, gives them a place to be. So what's replacing the green space in an urban area? Say it again.
Concrete houses.
Concrete houses, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, lots of concrete, really. If you talk about streets and roads and highways and freeways and everything else. Lots of buildings, lots of houses, lots of roads. It's mostly stuff for us, right? So shops, stores, everything, and that's okay. We also have the green lawns that go along with it, right? So monocultures of green that don't really benefit wildlife in any way. So it's stuff that benefits us. With a little bit of thinking and foresight, we could make a change and include some stuff for wildlife as we plan for people, right? So let's see how we can do that. These are two fields. They were just pastures, you know, green, grassy, weedy fields that were near the medical center. And one of the guys that did the landscape maintenance at the medical center for MD Anderson Cancer Center and some of the other areas right there, he took the Master Naturalist class. And he said, how can we add some nature around the hospital system? Because obviously we need it, right? People are stressed out there. So he took a look at some of the places that they were managing, and they were just kind of useless. You know, we go in there and we mow it 2 times a week, you know, it's just a waste of time and energy and resources. Could we plant it in something that would benefit wildlife and also benefit people and decrease our maintenance costs? So we don't have to mow it, pay for that gasoline, pay for that tractor to be in that site. So they planted it with wildflower seeds and native grasses. So these are just 2 empty fields full of grasses and native plants and wildflower seeds, you know, wildflowers. And they're beautiful. And people can, you know, if you're stressed out, you can drive up there, park right next to it, breathe it in. So they also did the same thing to a piece of property right by, if you're familiar with the medical center in Houston, the May Center, which is part of MD Anderson. And there was a big field right there. It's right next to the Metro Rail, and it's right on Holcomb. So Fannin and Holcomb, I guess, on that intersection. And it was just a another lot, same kind of idea. It'll eventually probably be built upon, another extension to the hospital. But at the time, it was just an area they mowed. He said, can we do the same thing? And they did. They put in a native prairie right there on that corner. So all of a sudden, they went from, yep, we have these big swaths we have to mow and there's nothing there. People just walk by it, to now there's benches, people stop, they eat their lunch, they watch the prairie. There are wildlife species, especially little insect species, that are showing up at that prairie that they've never seen before. Not that they're not listed, but they're from out somewhere else. They don't usually live right there in the medical center area. And now they're coming to the prairie because it's like, you planted it, here we come, right? So anyway, it was a pretty positive experience. And he actually left that position and got into a more habitat conservation type job. So he does this more on a regular basis. But anyway, and these are still there. So even though he's not there to maintain them, the next person that came in behind him are still maintaining them this way. So it's pretty exciting. It can be done, right? We just have to make the effort to say we want it. We want this done, and it's a place for wildlife to be. So the thing to remember, especially when you're planting around your yard or in your own landscapes, or if you're helping with some kind of a restoration project, the more plant diversity, the more habitat diversity equals the more wildlife diversity. So it's kind of like you're putting out that smorgasbord and you're saying, okay, here's everything we got. And the wildlife species will come in and take what they need, right? And so the more variety you can offer, the more variety of wildlife you'll have. Except in urbanizing areas, of course, we're simplifying. We're losing a lot of that diversity. So it's important to try and put it back. One of the things that happens in an urbanizing area is habitat fragmentation. You guys know this, right? You've heard it before. What happens is like developers take advantage of, okay, this piece of property is for sale. I'm gonna buy this piece of property and I'll develop this piece. And then another one develops this chunk, another one develops this chunk, and there's like a little green space left in between. The beauty of that is, hey, maybe that could be a park. That would be awesome. That would give wildlife a place to be. However, in some cases, that also means the wildlife that's in that spot is cut off from everything else. So it's a little fragment of habitat that's kind of isolated from everything else. And that's why they say it's a fragment, right? So if you're a small turtle, you're probably always going to live your life on that piece of fragment. If you're a lizard, a green anole, then you'll probably always live your life on that piece of habitat right there. So it might cut off gene flow as well. So you might get inbreeding, things like that happening within that wildlife species. If you're a big animal, if you're a deer, white-tailed deer, you can usually walk out. It might be a little hazardous. You might have to be careful, cross roads, things like that, but you can leave. If there's a drainage ditch, guess what you can follow? You can use that as a corridor to get out of the place. But you can move. The bigger animals can move, or if you can fly, you can leave. But the smaller animals usually stay. The other thing that happens is it happens to the soil primarily. So this was a picture we took not far from here. It's where the old Walmart, well, I think it was a Sam's or a Walmart that was going in. And so it was a pretty beautiful piece of property, right? And if you notice in the natural forest, there's layers to the trees, to the vegetation. So you've got the big trees at the very tip top, that's the canopy layer, right? And you have some wildlife species that will use the canopy. Not as many, but a few. And then you come down a little bit and you've got the mid-story, so the middle part of the forest. Then you've got the lower section, which is the understory. And then you've got the ground covers, the ground layer. Most wildlife species that we can think of, so most of our songbirds, most of our wildlife species that we start listing when we talk about wildlife, use the bottom 2/3 of that habitat. And yet when we develop for things for us, what do we take out? A lot of times it's everything, but if we're lucky and we leave some trees, we take out the bottom 2/3 of the habitat, right? Because we prefer, as a species, if you could let us be called a species, we prefer to be able to have a clean line of sight. We want to see what's around us, right? We feel safer if we can see through the trees and see around us. Developers will also tell you that they don't like to leave those lone trees because it's hard to develop around it. But my argument is leave some on the edge, right? Leave a corridor on the edge. You can put your green belt, your trail, nature trail through there, but leave it on the edge and then wildlife can use it too. I'm sorry, y'all. Pollen today. All right. So going back, let me see if this will go back. Yeah. So one of the things that happens, it happens to the soil. So if you've ever tried to grow something in hard, compacted soil, it's pretty difficult. You have to kind of, mush it up and add something to it, to make it grow things better. When we take off all the vegetation, we are opening the soil to the heat, to the sun, to the rain, to the wind, to everything. So you lose some soil. As they roll over it with the tractors and things like that, they're compacting the soil, compacting any tree roots that are around there. They are impacting the microbes that are in the soil. So as the heat beats down, you're sterilizing that soil. So if you wanted to go back and put plants back in it, what would you have to add? Compost, yeah, compost, put those microbes back in and then plant, right? Did you have some?
Yeah, just one thing, I go in and record like developments happening. And what I see happening that's very concerning is they are burying a lot of trash.
Oh, yeah.
All sorts of plastic, tires, you can think of like literally anything that can end up in the landfill. They are just continuing to put it in there. And while I do understand that like on the edges of perimeters of land, green spaces would be good, but it also acts like a filter for all the trash that moves through the wind. And developers don't care. So we have to really take into consideration that although we potentially put compost in the ground and ultimately maybe benefiting the soil condition, well, the previous person basically already 100% destroyed it all. I mean, there's no salvaging it because they just threw pollutants and contaminants all over.
Yeah, it's potentially possible. In my own neighborhood, they went in and they took out a complete forest like that, knocked everything down, took the valuable trees as lumber, right, to haul those off. All the rest of the vegetation, they shredded it. And you're thinking, okay, so they're shredding it, they're leaving it in place. And then they have to come back in because we're potentially in a floodplain or right adjacent to a floodplain. They have to raise up that property 2 feet, right, and then build. They're building on all that composting material, right? So eventually those homes are going to have cracked slabs and all kinds of stuff because it's going to be shifting under them. And it's like, it's kind of like, what are you thinking? But there's no regulation against it. So they're making, people see that and they think, okay, I hate that they took down the forest, but at least they're not burning the vegetation that's left. But it's kind of a tricky situation. It doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes, but
It's because money, it's cheaper.
oh, it's cheaper. It's cheaper. You don't have to haul it off, pay for any kind of landfill space or anything like that.
Yeah, and because we don't have basements in this area, a lot of people have problems. I mean.
Yeah. I mean, if you really wanted to do, I guess, the right thing, and if you had to take the forest down, bring it to John Ferguson, so he can turn it into mulch that people can use. I don't know. There's not, this is such a complex problem, and there's not really a one-step perfect answer. Okay, so the other thing that happens, and you alluded to it, is once you clear up all that space and maybe you put concrete down on top, it becomes an impervious surface and everything drains off of it. And that's the design, is that the rainfall hits and then it moves stuff off into where? Where does it go? So it goes into the storm drain, right? Then it goes into the nearby ditch or creek, which could be one and the same, depending on, what they've done. And then it goes usually into a bayou, and then goes into San Jacinto River, or maybe Trinity River, depending on where you're at. And then it goes into the Galveston Bay or Trinity Bay, and then goes into the Gulf of Mexico. So you can see there's a lot of sediment that gets moved downstream from all of the development that's going on here. Sediment's not good for aquatic species. So fish, wildlife that are in the water, they don't like having all that sediment come downstream. So it used to be that our wetlands would trap that sediment, and all of our riparian zones, the tree areas along our creeks and bayous, would trap that sediment and hold it in place, and the water would be a little cleaner, going downstream. But we've removed a lot of those. So, okay, are you depressed enough yet? And I'm not even done yet.
Reading the chapter was enough.
I know. So let's talk about rainfall, right? The picture in the upper left is when you've got some natural space. So you've got some green space around, the rain falls down. Where does the rain go? Most of it goes into the ground, right? Seeps into the ground, the roots pick it up, the plants use it for growth. A little bit evaporates off, a little bit is runoff, so very small amount of runoff. And that's usually when we get just so much rain, which we do, that the plants can't handle it. They're like, okay, we give up, and some of it runs off. All right, so the next one on the right, let's say we put in a road and we pave a little bit of it, clear a little bit of it, sorry, to put in a house. Okay, so we've got less going in the ground, not quite as much, but it's still okay because we still have green space. We get a little bit more that's running off and a little bit that's still evaporating off. So, okay, so we're still okay. We still have enough green space to kind of handle. The runoff's only 20%, we're doing okay. Let's take it even farther down below, those two pictures down below. You can see when you clear out the green space, you don't have the water going into the soil as much at all because the roots are not helping it go into the soil. It is still going in. But you can see, like in a downtown situation where you've got big office buildings and stuff, it's not infiltrating the ground hardly at all. It's running off. Most of that water is hitting the ground and running off because of so much impervious surface. So pretty depressing. When you get to 75 to 100% impervious surface, only 15% sinks in and 55% runoff. So it's like, then we have to deal with flooding. What do we do with all that water that's running off? And you may think, okay, my house is good, my house is safe. What's happening upstream from you? Because you've got all this runoff. If it's an urbanizing area and all that runoff's coming your way, where does that go? Can your property handle it? One of the things that people don't realize is native grasses are really, really good at absorbing that water. Their roots go deep. And so a lot of our prairie plants have very deep roots. You can see this guy standing next to a prairie plant And look at how deep the roots are. They're above his head. So the little tiny, looks like a caterpillar crawling on the surface over there, that's turf. Look at how shallow the roots are compared to everything else. So even some nice, bunch grasses, things like that are going to help you out and help pull that water into the ground. Also the riparian zones, replanting, yeah.
So one of the big reasons you want water to be cold is to recharge the aquifers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
We don't think about it as much around here, because aquifers are not really in our daily vocabulary. But especially in the hill country, I mean, they talk about it every single day. And they report on the daily news, what's the level of the aquifer, right? We should be doing more of that here. Yeah, just so it stays in our mind. We need to help water get to the aquifers. But this is our filtration system. And this is what we are losing when we take out the forest and we don't leave, an edge. One of the big designs, let me just say it that way. One of the big engineering designs in the past has been to channelize the waterways. And usually it means push back the banks, slope them, and clear the vegetation. Why do you do that? Why would we want to do that? Yeah. So if you think about the water coming your way from all that runoff, you got to do something with it. And we don't want water standing around and flooding stuff that's near us, right? Our houses or whatever. So the idea was you get it in that channel and it's going to move fast downstream. So let's, move it, keep it moving downstream until the communities downstream went, whoa, waving the white flag, you're flooding us now. So then they had to go in and channelize, right? So that's what you kind of saw in the Houston area because we're sitting in a marsh, right? You guys are upstream, which is perfect, great, you're doing good, except you're losing a lot of your forest now. So anyway, channelizing is usually like this. If you're lucky, put the vegetation back along the edge. Don't leave it open. That's sometimes you're able to do that, sometimes not. Mm-hmm.
Is that why they're retaining ponds in different subdivisions because they're not doing the channeling?
Yeah, that's the newer engineering model is they channelize a little bit, to kind of straighten out some of the oxbows and, the curviness, but they are creating detention basins that when the water rises to a certain level in the channel, it overflows into the detention basin and stays there. And it acts kind of like a marsh in a way, because it's having the water flow in there and the sediment drops out, and then the water can eventually flow back into the bayou when it goes down.
Or they keep it circulating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the nice thing is if it's got some vegetation in that detention basin, it can serve as habitat. So it's a good win-win, type of thing. Did you have a
Just a
question?
quick, yeah, I have been restoring some areas at a property in Huntsville, and one of the biggest challenges after the land has been cleared and soil's been exposed, seeds don't take as well and vegetation don't grow as fast again, because when runoff happens that much more.
Yeah.
And so it takes the seeds, it erodes everything out, nutrients go out, so there's a lot of challenges.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, if you can seed it with some rooted vegetation first, and then maybe that would capture some of those seeds, the roots would. It is tough though. You're right. It is very tough. Some people use straw just to try and hold stuff in place, but it's all the trial and error of what's going to work in that spot, in that condition. You're right. All right. that something I need to? Okay. All right, something else that happens, another depressing thing. One more thing to add is habitat simplification. So this is when we go in and we say, we don't want the bottom 2/3 of that habitat. We're taking out the bottom 2/3. We're turning this into a park. We still have the trees, but we don't want the other vegetation because we want to be able to maintain it. So police officers that drive around the park are very happy because they have line of sight. They can look through the trees. They can see if there's any shenanigans going on. And, but when you talk about the wildlife species that can handle this situation, what kind of species are we talking about? What can handle this?
Horses and cattle.
Horses and cows.
Birds.
What kind of birds?
Goats.
Maybe woodpeckers, depending on the tree, right? Maybe grackles, fire ants, squirrels, maybe depending on the tree. Yeah. So anyway, the list gets a little shorter because there's not as much vegetation, not as much diversity to offer them. So anyway, this is what's happening a lot in our parks, in our communities. Sorry, trying not to sneeze. Okay. The other thing that happens is when we landscape our homes, right? So we've got a new home, yay. My brother's going through this right now. He is moving to Bastrop. I'm like, boo-hoo, I'm gonna miss you. But his wife has a new job in Austin. It's like, okay, that's a perfect place to live. It sounds good. But he's like, we're downsizing. We have a smaller lot. What are we gonna grow? Okay, we'll figure it out. You don't have much space. You don't have a lot of plants that you're gonna be planting there. When you try and make a choice of what to plant in your landscaping, think about the wildlife species that you might want to be attracting. So a lot of times, most people I talk to that call up and have questions, they usually go to the big box stores. It's cheap, it's whatever they have available and whatever's there in that season. So they'll go in and let's plant this, this, and this, right? Guess what? They're all from some other country. They're not from anywhere in the United States. They're not from Texas. They're maybe a Chinese ligustrum, a crepe myrtle. I can't remember where crepe myrtles are from. Japan? China? Yeah. So a lot of the things that you think, oh yeah, this is super hardy. They'll tell you it's super hardy. Nothing bothers it. It doesn't get disease. That's because it's from somewhere else. It came from somewhere else, and they didn't bring the insect pests and the, whatever fungus or whatever attacks it. They just brought the plant. So yes, it's very hardy, but it doesn't have any benefits for wildlife. So this particular situation, everything in that picture is non-native, and we see that all the time. So we went from a natural landscape, habitat, to cleared, to house with nothing for wildlife. But we can change that. Okay, it messed up again.
I got it. Magic finger.
Yay. In the Master Naturalist program, you're going to find out that we talk about native plants all the time, ad nauseum. So why? Why do we talk about native plants all the time? It's because they have benefits. They're plants with benefits. They're better adapted to growing in the conditions around here. So they have adapted here for, millennia. I don't know, however long they've been here. They're familiar with the soil. They're familiar with the droughts and the floods and everything else. They know how to survive that stuff. They're more familiar to the wildlife species that live here. So maybe there's an animal that has some sort of parental guidance, right? So maybe it's a bird and the mother is taking that little fledgling around and saying, yes, eat this, eat this, eat this. She's showing that bird the native species that are good to eat. This is what's available now. Yes, this is good to eat. She's not showing them the non-native stuff because she's not familiar with it. She doesn't eat that stuff. And so it's just kind of a wasted space with a wasted plant. Most of our non-native species, most of our native species are more resistant to insect and diseases. They've grown up with it. They know how to withstand that stuff. The next two, do you see the word no in there anywhere? I get a little perturbed because during the drought, people were calling up saying, okay, yes, I need to know what to plant because I'm going to plant native species because they require no maintenance and no water. Where did you get that idea, right? So it's less maintenance, less water because they can withstand that stuff. They might not look pretty when they're withstanding that stuff. They might just sit like a little tree, you know, a little shrub just sitting there. They may not be blooming. Once the rain comes, then all of a sudden, poof, you know, here comes the blooms. But they're just kind of surviving in that survival mode. And then they have benefits for us in that they conserve water. They help send the water down, you know, into the soil and hold sediment in place, things like that. So all that stuff we've been talking about. All right, have you heard of a guy by the name of Doug Tallamy?
Yes.
Yay, awesome. All right, he is a professor of entomology and his name is Douglas Tallamy. He's written several books now. The latest book is Nature's Best Hope. And do you have any idea who the best hope is? Us. Yeah, us.
Got a lot of things.
Yeah. So in one of his books, he talked about chickadees. And a friend of his gave him a nest box. So let me back up. He and his wife bought a piece of property and it was full of non-native vegetation. Non-native shrubs, everything, trees. He and his wife have been gradually going through, taking out all that non-native stuff and planting natives. So as part of that, his friend gave him the birdhouse, right? And so he was all excited. Yay, okay. What's gonna, you know, nest in here, yay. So he put it up outside his breakfast room window. And so as he sits and drinks his coffee in the morning, he was like, I'm just gonna kind of keep a watch on it, you know, see if anything takes up residence in there. Well, sure enough, chickadees took up residence. And then he was all excited and like a proud papa. Okay, what are they gonna bring to feed the little chickadees? You know, the little babies, once the babies hatch, what are they gonna be bringing? And he thought, like most of us, it'll just be a bunch of insects. Well, he found out pretty quickly it's caterpillars. So as those little infant birds are eating as they're really young, they need high protein sources. So caterpillars are like this little packet of high protein. So being a photographer as well as an insect person, he started snapping photos of all the insects that the birds brought. So of course as he gives his talks, he's showing you these pictures, fast paced, and he tells you what the species is of each one, because he knows them as they're going into the little birdhouse, right? So butterfly and moth species lay their eggs on plants, specific plants. That's their larval host plant. So the little caterpillars are eating the leaves of the native plant. Some of them are very specific. Some of them are pretty generalist, right? They lay the eggs on a bunch of different plants. So he was watching this procession of caterpillars go into the house. And he said, I wonder how many it takes to feed that little clutch of chickadees. So he started counting. So in the end, the chickadees brought between 390 to 570 caterpillars to the nest every day. That's a lot of work when you're carrying usually one caterpillar at a time, right? Parents feed nestlings for 16 to 18 days in the nest, and then for several days, once the little birds have popped out and have started learning how to fly, you know, they're kind of around your yard and stuff. So the answer that he found was up to 10,260 caterpillars for one clutch of chickadees. What if you had two clutches of chickadees? You know, 20,000 caterpillars. So then he started thinking, you know, I'm really lucky. These chickadees were able to successfully raise a clutch of chickadees. And it was all from my yard. It was things that are here in my yard. The chickadees were here because the caterpillars were there. The caterpillars were there because the native plants are there, right? You see the succession? Okay. He then, I don't know if it was before or after, but he started working with his students. And he said, okay, we're going outside. You guys are insect people? All right, we're gonna go and look for insects. So he sent them out and he said, go to, you know, this woods or this, you know, maybe he started with his property, I don't know. Go to this property, look at every plant that you see, find the caterpillars on it, and tell me what species of caterpillar that it is there, right? And then tell me the type of plant that they're on. So he made up a list, and it's very extensive. This is just a little part of it, and you can find it online. He started looking at families of trees, and he said the oak family by far is used by most caterpillars, most butterflies and moths, right? They're laying their eggs on oaks. The next one was plum, the plum species, right? The prunus family. So black cherry and plum and things like that. So those butterflies and moths are laying their eggs on those plants, and the caterpillars are eating the leaves. So you can see of the species, I mean, 456 species of butterflies and moths are using that family. Mhm.
I noticed those are all not pine trees. Do pine trees
Yeah.
contribute at all?
I don't know that they have pine trees where he looked. This was the mid-Atlantic states.
He's in Virginia.
So do they have pine trees in Virginia? So maybe they don't have that much in the way of use of butterflies and moths.
They
That's
don't
interesting.
have leaves. They can't eat the needles. So,
Well, I would think there might be something that could eat the needles, but maybe there's not many.
Well, they exude sort of a sappy stuff. You think, I know beetles and pine trees.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, the pine needles have kind of a waxy coating, so maybe they can't get through it very easily. Yeah.
There's a pine bark aphid that is the main host plant, or pines are the main host plant.
Okay, so if they're not looking for aphids, then they probably, you know, weren't counting it, then we're looking for caterpillars, yeah.
It does say on Google that about 203 species of butterflies and moths.
Use
do,
pine,
yeah,
okay, so 203,
eastern forests.
okay, so that's good to know, so there are some.
And I'm seeing a type of like pine caterpillar, which I remember when I lived in East Texas, they were all over the place.
Yeah.
So there's some, because those were the ones that made like mats.
Like tent caterpillar kind of things.
Yeah. So there's pine caterpillars.
I mean, one of the solutions, if you do get like the tent caterpillars or whatever up in your trees, is supposedly to open up the tent and let the birds in so they can eat the caterpillars, but anyway, so the one thing I want you to notice is look at the non-native species. So look at Chinese tallow tree. One species of butterfly or moth. You know what it's called? The Chinese tallow moth. Of course. I didn't realize there was one, right? But there is. Crepe myrtle, 3 species. So you can see the non-native species just don't have the wildlife use, the same amount of wildlife use that the native ones do. So if you want to do a productive landscape around your property, go with natives. Because you'll be benefiting a lot more than just the stuff that the non-natives do. And then the other thing that happens in urban areas is non-native species get introduced. Some of this stuff comes in through like ponds, people putting in ponds, or aquariums, having aquariums, having, some type of hobby, that brings in non-native vegetation or non-native species. And then when they get too big for whatever, habitat they're in or container they're in, then a lot of times people dump them out in nature. And so now Buffalo Bayou and a lot of our little creek areas have to deal with non-native fish. So including tilapia. So if you go fishing, you could get your dinner, by catching the tilapia that's been released into the, the bayou. So anyway, we have to deal with these now because they can be very, very invasive in our habitats. So dealing with apple snails and giant salvinia and any kind of weed species. So I've really, really depressed you, I'm sure. Nothing that you weren't expecting or realizing. So what's the answer, right? How do we deal with this? How do we make it better? How do we make this a more positive thing than a negative thing? Well, we've all got brains, right? We can put our heads together. We come up with amazing solutions. So we just need to kind of put our heads together and come up with a solution or several solutions. And then figure out how we can live in harmony with nature rather than always be at battle with it, right? Some of the mentality that Kelly and I deal with some of the projects that go on is, we can conquer nature, we can design better, and, do a better job than nature does. And it's just like, you're just asking for trouble because, we should be working with nature, not against it. Nature always seems to find a way, to outsmart us at times. And the other thing too is that we need to take responsibility for our own actions. And if we have an issue with a wildlife species, maybe we need to change our actions, right? Maybe there's something we're doing that's actually encouraging them to be there, right? And I'll give you an example. All right. So we get a lot of calls right now about urban coyotes in subdivisions. Kelly always makes the comment that people, so we get all these calls, well, I'm seeing a coyote. I just saw a coyote. People are seeing them more because they have the security cameras up, the Ring doorbell cameras, all that stuff. So you're seeing the coyote walk by. You didn't see it before. So it may be the exact same coyote, but you're seeing it walk by 6 times, or something, right? Coyotes are a part of our lives now. They will continue to be a part of our lives. They took the spot that we used to have red wolves. So they are now our top canine predator in our area. Red wolves, their populations decreased, especially when we started doing the bounties on red wolves. So we pretty much hunted them out of living. And then they started breeding with coyotes to try and survive. So now we have some coyotes that look a little wolfish, which is, they probably have some wolf genes in them. But we will still have coyotes no matter what we do. If you do the action that our former governor did with coyotes, just shoot them, right? Just shoot them. You can, that is an option, unless you live in a subdivision where you can't fire a weapon, right? But if you're in the country, just shoot all the coyotes you want, right? Is that the answer? Maybe in some situations, but guess what? Nature is going to outsmart you. So what you do, what happens in that situation is you've got a population of coyotes. And if you take out a big chunk of that population, it leaves a hole in the population. So the female coyotes up their litter sizes. So when they produce their pups, there's more in the litter. So they're trying to fill that hole, right? Spread the coyotes out more. So the best situation they found through research is that you want a breeding pair, a bonded pair of coyotes to take up residence and claim your house or your property as part of their territory. Because what do? They will defend it against who? Other coyotes. So they're doing your work for you, right? So all you have to do is make sure that that pair of coyotes and that little family is doing the behavior that you'd like them to do. You can train them, right? You can say, okay, every time you see me, I want you to turn around and run. I want to see the tail end of you. If you have a coyote that comes into your backyard and takes a look at you sitting on your porch and sits down and looks back at you, okay, is that a good situation? No, that's probably questionable, right? I mean, that coyote is not showing a fear of you. It's not showing a respect that you're there. What you really want to have is if the coyote comes in your backyard, takes a look at you and goes, ah, and runs, perfect, that's perfect, right? So it's being a normal coyote, you're being you. Don't put food out for coyotes, right? You don't want to attract them. If the coyote comes in your yard, sits down, I want you to stand up, holler, yell, scream, throw your coffee cup at the coyote, use an air horn, you know, the little can of air horn, blast the sound, make a loud noise, bang, you know, bang on a trash lid, whatever you've got available. Teach the coyote, and when it sees a person, it turns and goes the other way. You might have to work with a neighborhood, right? Your neighbors, and say, okay, we've got a coyote that's coming in. It's being a little bit too casual around us. We need to work together as a neighborhood and get the coyote to turn and go the other way when it sees people. That's the best solution. However, if you're feeding cats outside at night, okay, is your action potentially causing part of the problem, right?
Now you're attracting rats.
You're attracting mice, rats, maybe you have a bird feeder and it drops food, you know, during the day, and there's a pile of it down on the ground, and rats come up at night and eat the seed. Are you creating a nuisance, right, for that coyote? A feeding platform for that coyote to come eat the rats. So some of our actions, you see what I'm saying? Some of our actions we can change, and we can maybe get rid of that, you know, that situation. And then if there's a situation, I mean, there've been some up in Dallas area where coyotes actually bitten somebody. They think that was probably related to feeding, right? The coyote was used to being fed from somebody's hand, and so they bite people's hand. But that's a situation that's a trained coyote. It's trained to come to get food from a person. So that's not a coyote you can really keep in the population because it's already been trained. It's like feeding alligators, you know? You keep feeding the alligator, eventually he might come to get you if you don't have food, you know? So certain things like that, you know, you can stop that situation. You don't want to train the wildlife. So bring your pets in at night. Don't feed things outside at night. Bring that food in. Only feed enough in your bird feeder that will get eaten during the day. What else? Sometimes during the drought, it's water. So for bobcats, we had people calling us up saying, I'm seeing a bobcat in my backyard, and it's during the day. And I said, really? Okay, what are you seeing it doing? Well, it's coming to my pool. Oh, we're in a drought. Okay, so get it? Okay, there's a handout in the back. It talks about coyote behavior and actions that we should be taking for each behavior, right? Whether we need to be concerned or not. Other things we can be doing. We can be conserving habitat where we can. So this is a golf course. Look at how rough the roughs are. The water is actually natural, right? Now you might not want to go in and get your ball if it goes in that water, but wildlife can live here. And there are actually certifications that golf courses can get for habitat, right? For doing good habitat management. Detention basins or little natural areas that have natural vegetation. Now this stuff might be weedy or look weedy, but wildlife can use it, and it's a travel corridor. So this is just a little water catchment area in a subdivision. So you could also do the same. We talked about the detention basins, right? Hold water and have vegetation right there. This is a community that I just read about in the Chronicle, and it's down in the Richmond area. And it's actually, they're developing it so that there's nature trails, green space, nature areas, and also a farm. So they've got a farm included in their community. And so you can join the farm club, you can join the veggie share. And so everybody contributes to the farm and they grow stuff. You can go and volunteer there and help them grow the vegetation and things like that. And then you get a percentage of it back. So with the veggie share, you know, whatever they've got, they portion it out to the people that are part of the group, and out it goes. So I was pretty impressed with this. And I think this is becoming, they call them agri-hoods. So it's becoming more common. I mean, it's not super common right now, but it's becoming more looked at. They also have farmers markets, things like that. So we could do the same with wildlife, right? Not really producing it for use, but
Well, you could potentially, like, if you plant forests, you could put seeds and, you know.
yeah, everybody do like a native garden or something, native plants. Yeah, butterfly habitat, pollinator community, you know, something like that. This ranch down in that same area, they had a dry creek that went through the property before they developed it. And it looked like a ditch. What they did was they kind of refurbished it, brought it back to life, replanted it. It's much, much prettier now. It's had more years to grow up and stuff. But this community has this huge swath of nature that goes through it. And they did it on purpose, right? They didn't take it out. Instead, they put it in. So I was kind of impressed. But they manage it also so that it keeps the native and nature around. So they have wetlands, they have no-mow prairies, so they don't mow, they only mow probably once a year. And any wastewater waters the landscaping. So anyway, it's a pretty interesting community. But that's what I'm saying is, you know, putting your heads together, coming up with an idea. This was somebody's idea, and they did it, and people are living there now because of that idea. So we can do that. We can do more of that. We don't have to just clear everything. It's just a matter of thinking ahead. And then also, if you have trees in your yard, if you have holes in the trees, leave them. If you have old dead trees, snags we call them, leave them up if possible, unless they're going to fall over on somebody. But there are a ton of wildlife species that use holes in trees. So you can see a few of them up there, including our little bluebirds. Kelly just sent me a thing the other day about ocelots. wildlife crossings are becoming a big thing as well. So our highway systems can be a big death trap for wildlife species because they're trying to cross the roads to get to other habitat. On the upper right, I'm not sure what state that's from, but that is similar to the one that they just put in Memorial Park in downtown Houston that is crossing over two really busy roads. And the idea is that wildlife, big wildlife, can cross over the top of the road and not have to cross the road itself. People can cross it too, and they're going to plant it in prairie. So it'll be open, wildlife can see, they won't be too nervous about crossing. In the bottom two pictures, that is ocelot crossing. And you think, why would ocelots have an issue, right? They're out in the middle of the country down in South Texas. But traffic has increased a lot. Goodness, we have a whole concert going on over there. So anyway, they're trying to cross these roads. And there are more people that are driving the road, so they are seeing them. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service used some extra money they had. They put in a culvert under the road. And they said, we don't know if they'll use it. This is where they tend to cross. So we'll put this culvert and see if they cross. They put up game cameras. And guess what? They captured an ocelot using the culvert under the road. So instead of going over on the road, they're going underneath it and using it. And they got photos of a lot of other wildlife species using it as well. So there was just an article in one of the news, I can't remember which news it was, about a female ocelot and her kitten that were crossing the road. And somebody had stopped and seen it and videoed it or took photos. But it was like, oh, we need a crossing right there. We need a, culvert. Yeah. So anyway, so these are becoming a big issue, big part of the solution. In the upper left, that's a really small crossing, right? That's for turtles. And so obviously there's a wetland or something, a pond on the other side of the road. And so what this community did was they put this little culvert under the road, and they thought, okay, so the guardrails kind of go toward the little culvert, and the turtles would be guided to that crossing so they could go under the road and go to the pond. The turtles would get to that spot right there and look in and go, nope. And they're like, what's wrong? What? They realized the turtles needed light in the culvert. They needed to be able to see in there, I guess, to make sure that there were no predators, right? Nothing's going to go in and eat them, So see that little grate right there on the road? It gives light. So the turtles say, oh, I see. And they go in and they use it now. So it's just a kind of a funny way to, fix the issue. And now they can cross safely without having to go up on the road and get smashed. So anyway, funny. And then I saw these and I thought, why can't we have these in, Houston? Somebody told me they do see one that looks like this.
There's one in.
Yeah. So I don't know if wildlife would use them. I don't know if it would be healthy for wildlife to use them.
How many moths and butterflies?
I know. Probably not any, but yeah. But you might be able to have a hawk or something build a nest in there. I don't know. Anyway, pretty funny. And then the last thing is do whatever you can for your part. Add native plants to your landscape, to your vegetation. This homeowner put in a rain garden, and it was just a way to capture the runoff coming off their property. And instead it goes into like this little depression where they've got all kinds of plants growing, and the plants are benefiting all the pollinators. So we've got hummingbirds and butterflies and moths and everything else using the vegetation. So it's kind of a win-win situation. But we can do that too, right? Our depression might need to be a little deeper though, just because we get so much water. But it can run off, right? It can. So anyway, the one thing I wanted to bring up too, I didn't in my introduction talk about the bat team. It's one of my favorite things to work with. So we have 2 different bat teams now, and they are groups of master naturalist volunteers that devote their time and energy to giving out factual information about bats. And it's kind of like, you know, taking a misunderstood wildlife species and turning it around. And it's working. It's working in our area. There is a bat team that just started up in Huntsville. And I don't know if you guys have seen the news about the Texas Department of Criminal Justice building, the old cotton warehouse. Has a large population of bats in it. One estimate was 750,000. They have Mexican free-tailed bats in there. And at first it was evict the bats, get the bats out of there. We're going to demolish the building. We need the bats out. Now they are rethinking it, and there are several proposals that have gone to TDCJ. Of course, one option is to take the building down. Another option is to put up another building for the bats and then demolish the old building. One of them is to repair the roof structure, which is what's one of the problem issues, and let the bats stay. The interesting thing is it's community, the Huntsville community that's making these decisions, right? That they're bringing forth these options, these opportunities for TDCJ. So this month we should hear something about, you know, whatever the final decision is. But in the meantime, we've got a group of master naturalists from Heartwood that are volunteering time on their Friday night to go down and talk to the visitors that come to watch the bats emerge from the old cotton warehouse. So if any of you guys would like to do that, we can hook you up with the right person. You know, it's only a couple hours on a Friday night and you're just talking about bats. You can choose the Friday night, so it's not like every Friday night. And then we have another one like that in Houston. So we work with the Wall Drive Bridge down on Buffalo Bayou.
Are y'all taking new members?
Say it again?
Are y'all taking new members?
Yeah. So if you guys are interested, you can either give me your email address or you can take down mine and just let me know that you're interested and I'll hook you up. Tristan Bryant is the wildlife biologist that's in charge of the Huntsville one. And then I'm doing the one in Houston. So.
Yeah, from my understanding, and I live in Huntsville, so I've seen they put those houses to try to get them to move. But they didn't move, now the population increased.
So the houses are kind of an issue in that it's something we could fix. It's going to cost a lot of money. But the houses, when they were built, they weren't built to the right preferences, you know, the bats' preferences. And so the bats are going there like, you know, yeah, we're checking them out. It's substandard housing. We're not doing it. So they know, you know, it's like, you don't like it. We're not going to. And the interesting thing about that colony is it's a maternity colony. So they need a certain temperature regime, right? And those houses obviously don't even have it. So they probably went and checked, you know, the females checked it out and went, no, this isn't gonna work. So, yeah. So that's one of the issues is maybe just fix those back up and then you take down the building, you know, they'll either move there or not. But the one thing we don't want to have happen is take down the building and the bats don't have a place to go and they come back and go into buildings around the area. Yeah, because I mean, there's some older buildings in Huntsville. You don't want to fill it up with bats. The business community in Huntsville it was interesting talking to them because they're very interested in keeping the bats there because they said that's our one big attraction. And people are starting to come to downtown Huntsville to see the bats and they're spending money in our businesses. So it's like, hey, whoa, wait a minute here, you know? So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, just email me if you're interested. Any other questions? Okay, my question for you. Are you depressed?
Yes.
No. Did I bring you up a little bit from the earlier depression? Read your chapter if you haven't. It goes into a lot more detail, gives you a lot of other examples, and then there's reference material in the back too, so. All right, well, thank you guys very much. Nice meeting all of you, and hopefully we'll get to do some projects or something together. Thank you.
Kelly, and he works with Diana.
Hello.
Kelly, finish introducing yourself and have at it, darling.
Thank you, Ms. Amanda. My name is Kelly Norrid. I am a wildlife biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife Houston Urban Wildlife Program. And I'm here today to talk to you a bit about, I kind of call this the finger wagging lesson. It's not, I love doing this. I love doing this presentation. It's one of my favorite presentations to do. I try to make it fun. I try to make it very interactive. So definitely do not hesitate in stopping me, asking questions. This PowerPoint is nothing more than a guideline. If we get through the PowerPoint, we get through the PowerPoint. If we don't get through the PowerPoint, we don't get through the PowerPoint. PowerPoint's not the purpose. The purpose of this is to, first off, give y'all an idea about Texas Parks and Wildlife, give you an idea about wildlife laws, the history of wildlife laws, and how wildlife laws affect you as a master naturalist, and how all of that works with you going through this program, and a little bit about what this program is and what your limitations are when it comes to this program. So that's why I kind of call it the finger wagging lecture. Like I said, it's a really good presentation. I really like to make it interactive, and the idea of it is we're also going to talk about ethics and what is ethics and what constitutes ethics. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. Hopefully I try to make it as lighthearted as possible, so it's not just total finger wagging. All right, there we go. First off, I like to explain to folks a bit about Texas Parks and Wildlife and what exactly is Parks and Wildlife. Most people think of it as the state park system, first off, and then they think about game wardens, things like that. Well, Texas Parks and Wildlife is actually made up of a number of different divisions. And to kind of give you an idea about Parks and Wildlife is State Parks has a division leader. So State Parks has Rodney Franklin, and Wildlife is John Zablosky. So I kind of like, I tell people that, they think of Parks and Wildlife as being the same entity. In all actuality, Parks and Wildlife are two totally different entities from each other. And I'll go on and explain a little bit more later on how different we are, more than just the fact that one is parks and one is wildlife. It goes actually a little deeper than that. But just kind of give you an overall idea. These are all the different divisions that we have within Texas Parks and Wildlife. We have law enforcement, state parks, coastal fisheries, inland fisheries, wildlife. So basically we've got wildlife and coastal fisheries and inland fisheries. Those are the three divisions that deal with what we think of as wildlife in the state of Texas. Inland fisheries is more, as it sounds, it looks more at fish. And so wildlife, that's where we run into mammals and birds and insects and reptiles and amphibians and all that is under the Wildlife Division. The only places really in Texas Parks and Wildlife where parks and wildlife kind of meet together is, well, up at the COO level. So it's up in here where they really, but we share IT department. We share a human resources department, communications department, support resources. So we share those things in common. But pretty much that's where the common thread between parks and wildlife really ends. And this is one of the ways how parks and wildlife differ from each other. Parks is state funded. Parks is funded by sales tax on sporting goods and entry fees into the park and a few other areas that parks is funded. Wildlife, we're funded primarily by something that's called the Pittman-Robertson Act. That was an act of Congress in the 1930s that charges an excise tax on hunting ammunition and hunting firearms. That money is then taken, put into a pool, and it's split between the states to manage the wildlife in the states. My salary is paid through the Pittman-Robertson Act. And it's a pass-through grant to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's a grant that goes to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that is then dealt out to the states to deal with wildlife on a state level. So I'm paid for by the federal government. I'm a state employee. I am paid by the comptroller's office, state comptroller's office, but I am paid, Diana is paid, and a large majority of our biologists' salaries are paid through the Pittman-Robertson Act. So that's how, and again, we're a little different than the state. I mean, than state parks. If y'all recall back, maybe hearing something called the Recovering Americans Wildlife Act that was really going strong up until December and then slammed into a brick wall and it stopped. One of the issues was with our program is we had to be very careful when it came to lobbying for the Recovering Americans Wildlife Act. Because it could be because now as a state employee, you can lobby for federal bills if it is okay through the governor's office with the federal government. They have like an office the state has an office that deals with things like that. And if the state's not lobbying for some federal legislation, as a state employee, you can get permission from the governor to do that. So we're like, okay, well, we just need to get permission from the governor and then we can lobby for Recovering America's Wildlife Act. Except we're paid through the Pittman-Robertson Act, which threw another monkey wrench in the works because we're paid by federal funds. So for us to work with the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, we had to have another code to code that time to. So we had to code that time to state funds. So we had to get a lump of money from state funds put over into our account so we could actually, so if I came here and we talked about Recovering America's Wildlife Act, I would go back to my office and I would say, okay, I talked about a Recovering America's Wildlife Act for 30 minutes. So I would code 30 minutes of my time to that state code. So there is no conflict of interest. You know, federal tax dollars are not going to pay for me to lobby for federal legislation. But therein kind of brings up our first ethical questions. Well, two ethical questions have been brought up now. All right. First ethical question is, where do we get the money from PR? Do you remember? Guns and ammunition. Yeah, that's where the money comes from to pay for my position, to pay for the wildlife diversity program, which the wildlife diversity program encompasses the urban wildlife program, non-game and rare species program, and guess what? The Master Naturalist program. So Pittman-Robertson Act actually funds this program we're in right now. As a matter of fact, it is what, anybody here familiar with government grants and loan or grants? A lot of times what they are, they're called like an 80-20 grant. So what it is, the government gives us a certain amount of money and we have, okay, let's say it's $100 million, which I wish. We'll be more realistic, $100,000. So the government, okay, so it's going to be $100,000 to run this department. The government gives us $80,000. We have to come up with $20,000 on our own to fund it. Part of the way that we fund and part of the way that we pay, we have our portion, our 20% of PR is paid for by your volunteer work. Because we're allowed to use $21.14 for every hour that you do volunteer work. We're able to take that and put it toward that $20,000, or it's actually a lot more than $20,000. I'm just using that number. It's actually 14.7 million as of FY16. The number fluctuated a little bit, but it's not much different than that right now. So your volunteer work actually helps us to cover that 20% of the PR matching fund that we have to have. Now, how is that an ethical question?
Because it supports the Texas National.
Yes. Okay, but we're getting money from firearms and ammunition.
But we're also charging or getting money from our volunteer time.
Yes. Yeah. But this whole, we wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for PR, right?
Right, but you said where is the ethics in there? So I would
Yeah.
think that, it's like, well, you're supporting something that's going to end up supporting you.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so because that's an issue with the mass, sometimes within, and I encourage you when you get through with this to look at helping administratively with this program, and you'll find out a lot of this kind of, how this kind of stuff works. You had a question earlier.
Well, if there was a limit on that 20, could you exceed the 20%? I mean, you have to meet the 20%?
You just meet the 20%.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to exceed, you just meet that 20%. The Master Naturalist program helps with, I think I don't know the exact percentage, but I believe the Master Naturalist program helps with about 35% of that match. 35 or 40% of that match is through this program. No, okay, well, let's say, yeah, ma'am.
Kind of a nerdy question.
Mhm.
Of the federal money that comes back to Texas, is it the equivalent of what we pay, or is it somehow just divvied up?
It's divvied up based upon the population of each state. So it's divvied up by population. So, and there are some equations that they use in it, but it mainly goes by the population of the state. So Texas, California, New York gets a lot of money, but somewhere like Alaska, where there's more people in this classroom now than there is in the whole state of Alaska, there are certain stipulations to where they will get a fair share of it, but it's mainly done through population with some extra little equations on the end of it to make sure that Texas, California, and New York doesn't get all of the money. But if I say,
You brought up about how it's ethical
yes.
with utilizing our volunteer hours
Mhm.
to offset or to be able to get the $21
Yes.
per hour that we volunteer.
Mhm.
So the ethical question would be, how is it ethical to utilize our blood, sweat, and tears and you get a paycheck?
Well, first up, your blood, sweat, and tears isn't paying my paycheck. First and foremost, it is paying for this program. If it wasn't for the volunteering in this program wouldn't exist. So you by volunteering, you are keeping this program alive by volunteering. Because if the matching fund wasn't needed or the matching fund could be taken from somewhere else, then this program wouldn't be. You see what I'm saying there?
Right, which all of us gives to the greater good of the state of Texas by.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you get nifty little pins for it. Yes, ma'am.
I imagine, is there a tax write-off for the sellers who are contributing to this tax or the Pittman Act?
Yeah, I understand.
No,
This isn't a tax write-off for companies?
there is an excise tax. An excise tax is an added tax
Okay.
to a goods or service that is then used for a specific reason. We have an excise tax in the state of Texas on sporting goods, and it was supposed to have gone to parks in 1992. It finally started going to parks recently. It went into the general fund. But it recently started going into, to parks. So an excise tax is just an added tax on a good or service. Yes.
I think to me, the biggest ethical question or dilemma would be that we're monetizing nature to a certain extent. And so why is it that we have to put a price tag as to taking care of nature? And so otherwise would it not be taken, or have people that could at least like you or other people that would be a voice for nature? I think to me, that's the biggest ethical. Why is it?
Yes, I see that, but then I also go, this is the world that we have created is a monetary based society. Therefore, to have me and Diana and other folks, you're gonna have to pay us something because we couldn't exist without some sustenance, some way to live. So it's not really as much. That's another question that we could go down that rabbit hole when it comes to monetizing, how do you fairly put a value on wildlife? I do it every day whenever I talk to landowners and I do 1D1 open space valuations on their property. So that's another question good question, but that's another way to go down that rabbit hole really desperately. Yes, ma'am, you had a question over here?
Actually, a problem about it, but the Pittman Robertson money is for the state, Texas master, whatever we are.
Okay, no, the Pittman Robertson Act money goes to the states to manage wildlife within the states.
And so the 20% that is added by the volunteer hours, that goes not just to the little different chapters, it goes to the state Texas Master Wildlife organization, right?
It goes to Texas Parks and Wildlife. Yes, it goes to Texas Parks and Wildlife as a whole to assist in the matching fund for Pittman Robertson.
So my understanding is that from the state, there's not a junior program because there's not enough personnel to be able to handle the junior program. Our chapter has a junior program, which I think is, it appears to be a really neat program for kids to learn about and teach them before they turn older. And so that they can start doing naturalists. So does that mean that that 20% or the 35% that comes from the volunteer hours still isn't enough money to be able to have enough personnel to cover the things that really should be kind of
Well, okay, what we're doing, okay, there's one concept that I don't think is quite clicking. There is no $20.14. That doesn't exist. That there is no money is coming from this program to here.
That's more federal money based on the volunteer.
No. It is, what we can do is we can take for every hour of volunteer service that a master naturalist does, we can equate that to $20.14, which is then deducted from the amount of money that we owe for this is done, 403Bs, nonprofits do this every day.
No,
This
I
isn't
get
something unique to here. They do it every day. If you were to volunteer for the Houston Arboretum, and the Houston Arboretum gets a grant from the Department of the Interior, they can, and you volunteer there, they can take your volunteer hours and use those volunteer hours to deduct a certain amount from what is owed in that matching fund. You're not being paid $20.14 an hour the Master Naturalist program is not being paid $20.14 an hour for every hour that you do. And then the Master Naturalist program gives us the money back. No. That's not how it works. We can use that as an equivalent. They say, the powers that be say, that we value a 1 hour of a volunteer person's time as $20 or $21.14, whatever it may be. That money can be used as part of the matching funds for this. If that wasn't the case, and we still had this program going, your 1 hour of volunteer work, I'm not gonna say it's worthless, is monetarily no value to it.
So who's matching the funds? What's the
It's a credit, it's not, that's where I think you're missing.
It's an in-kind donation.
Yes.
And, right, it's an in-kind donation. So what happens is, and the Pittman Robertson grant actually says that they can't use any of this money to fund a junior master naturalist program.
Yes.
It has to come up from us ourselves. And so we're hoping that
reauthorization?
For America's Wildlife Act,
RAWA, yes.
yes. They're hoping that RAWA will allow us to actually have funds to fund another person at the state level.
Good, that makes sense.
Yes.
To do the junior master naturalist program.
This
So-
is, yes, this is imaginary money. It's not real money. It's not everybody in here is getting paid $20.11 or whatever, $21.14. It just says that the volunteer work that goes on here can be valued at a certain amount that we can then use to help pay the difference between the 80 and 20%, the 20% that we have to pay. There's still a considerable amount of money that Parks and Wildlife has to put into it to make up for the amount of money that PR brings in, and it comes through. We're going to have to move forward with a little bit on this. But what's interesting with this is where your ethic lies, as opposed to where I give this same class I'm the advisor for the Gulf Coast chapter. I give the class down there. Your ethic was financial. The money thing hit. Oh, I got the financial thing hit. It's finance. I had a lady get up and walk out of the class that I was giving here because she did not want to contribute and have anything to do with an organization that accepted blood money. Because it was funded. That's why I kept going back, folks. That's why I kept going back. It's firearms and ammunition, folks. It's firearms and ammunition. She did not want to be part of this organization that accepted blood money. Because to her, hunting was wrong. To her, hunting was unethical. I've done this. I'm also advisor to Lower Trinity, which is Liberty. I talk about it and say, yes, firearms and hunting ammunition. And people get a big smile on their face because look what I've done. I've helped to put this whole thing together. They're the only ones that can truly look at me and go, I pay your salary. Because truly they can. Yes.
So I volunteered with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Community Hunting for the past 14 years.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting. I like to see that it is firearms and ammunition because the hunters and stuff that are doing this are trying to give back into the environment, I feel like.
Yes.
And that's an ethic thing on my point that I see is more, yeah, maybe blood money, but I mean, your American dollar is blood money, you know?
Exactly.
So,
Real quick, and then we need to move
Yeah, I
forward.
guess my question is just how much of the goal of your vision is to promote hunting or do something related to maximizing hunting abilities in Texas?
Interesting question. We have two types of biologists in Parks and Wildlife. We have regulatory biologists and we have non-game biologists. So essentially we have game biologists and non-game biologists. There are 87 non-game or game biologists in the state of Texas. I can do this on my hands. There are 15 non-game biologists.
And the game, is that native game?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there's 80 something, 100 plus game biologists and a handful of non-game biologists, even though there's 37 game species and 3,600 something non-game species. I play a different role in Parks and Wildlife. I'm a game and non-game biologist. I'm both. So I am a non-game biologist, but I'm also the regulatory biologist for Harris, Galveston, and Chambers County. So I play two roles in Parks and Wildlife because there is not a regulatory biologist for those three counties. So I play the role as the turkey, deer, quail biologist. But yeah, and to go back to the guy's point in the back, which is the next thing I was getting to. Thank you for the segue. The rest of the money from the Wildlife Division comes from hunting licenses. Big time get Texas hunts. Hunting stamps. So let's say that you want to hunt waterfowl, you have to have a duck stamp. Let's say you want to go out and collect turtles or snakes or whatever, you have to have a reptile endorsement. You have to have these stamps. So hunting. Hunters pay more for conservation than any group, any single group. Hunters pay more in conservation than anyone. Hunters are there. Absolutely. Ducks Unlimited. We've all heard of Ducks Unlimited. Ducks Unlimited is one of the largest land conservation organizations in the world. You know why Ducks Unlimited was put together? so hunters could have somewhere to go hunt ducks. They have saved more wetland than any other organization in the world. And they are the ones that have pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed to get a non-lead shot used in waterfowl hunting. So you don't have lead shots sitting in water and degrading in water and causing heavy metal pollution in water.
And that's by design, they design that, I mean. that's
Yes.
what it is.
Yeah. Hunters are the greatest conservationists that we have. If you ever get a chance, or hopefully, has anybody seen Deep in the Heart? All right, watch Deep in the Heart. It's very interesting that it was hunters that pretty much almost destroyed everything in the 1800s when it came to wildlife in the US. But it's also hunters that brought it back. Because it was hunting regulations. It was hunters that pushed for regulation to say, because they're like, whoa, there's nothing left to shoot.
And the indigenous people were killed.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we look at it of the budget, this much of Parks and Wildlife Division is funded by hunters. That's different.
Oh, is it?
It's actually different. Yes, we will go over that. Hunters contribute over $5.5 billion for conservation in less than 60 years. They pay $372 million a year for conservation. And hunters do more to aid wildlife than any other group in America. Yes.
Do you mean by they do more? You mean they fund more?
Yes. Well, it's not just funding, because they will actually go out and do boots on the ground conservation work too. They will go do habitat restoration.
More than
They will
others.
go out and do, yes, than any other groups. And not only that, they contribute to the tax bases of these little towns. There are all these little towns in Central Texas would not exist.
My parents live in Lano.
Yes.
Yeah,
Llano wouldn't exist if it wasn't for hunters,
all in Lano.
because they come in and buy groceries and buy beer and eat at restaurants and buy beer and.
And I would say that a lot of those folks don't care that much about the land.
What's that?
A lot of the folks out there, they're on leases. They're not engaged with the land.
You also have to think about everyone in the cities too that don't care about their.
Yes, you're talking about urbanites also,
You also-
but the people who own that 2,500 acres of land. And you also have to think about, number two, life exists outside of the state of Texas also. So there are other states, and we're talking collectively the United States, but yes, hunters overwhelmingly. Now, there's a difference between Jimmy John, the trophy hunter who goes and spends $80,000 to go, shoot an elephant somewhere. And there's also a difference between, Joe from Excalibur Energy in Houston, who has a $8 million house in River Oaks that has to go shoot a deer so he can talk about it around the water cooler with his buddies. But I think you're looking at a very small aspect of the whole bigger picture.
Yeah, I think I was just wondering more about whether they are able to afford to give more. It just seems like do more to aid wildlife is kind of a general statement than any other group in America. And I come from the family countries, we're very engaged in wildlife, but I guess.
So
there
do you
are-
just go out and shoot deer and just let them, what's,
Well, my family's very engaged in land management.
okay, so you're the exception to the rule you just set forth.
No, I think I'm looking at it as a matter of access and a matter of funding. I think hunters do have a lot more money to aid wildlife than other groups in America. And any wildlife on a mass scale, right? Just seems like there are other groups, nonprofits that also do a lot to aid wildlife.
Oh, I'm not saying that only hunters do this. But I'm saying that they are a very large contributor in many ways in funding and also into aid wildlife. Number one, in hunting, the act of hunting itself aids wildlife.
Oh, yeah.
The act of doing it itself aids wildlife.
Yeah.
You know, and helping different organizations and volunteering with different organizations. I guarantee you the vast majority of biologists in Parks and Wildlife are hunters also. And a lot of the people who are in these conservation groups are hunters themselves.
Yeah.
So
I
yes,
see what you're saying.
a
I would
huge
just
amount.
Love a breakdown of that last bullet.
Well,
But I think.
going and asking every single person that's there helping doing a prairie restoration, do you hunt? You know, that's difficult to do.
Yeah.
You know, so are there numbers that say, yes, we can get numbers to the amount of 30 bullets and things that are sold and get numbers like that. The same way that you look at, you know, Sahara Club or whatever different club may be, you know, that contribute, that go out and remove invasive species, create wetlands and do things like that that are hunters. They're just not walking out there with a big badge on their chest that says, I'm a hunter. I'm gonna out here, I'm out here doing it. Yes.
Is there a, do we know, like, say, background or ethnicity, majority of people, who are the biggest group of hunters in the United States?
White men. Yeah.
So that, I mean,
Yeah.
that could sort of trickle down to, I think, you know, like back to colonialism. I mean, like, how can you separate wildlife from native people, right? So like, if you talk about conservation, how can you conserve land, but then keep certain humans out and then only allow a certain group of people in for a certain purpose? I don't consider that conservation.
Not quite on the grasping what you're.
Well, Native Americans, right? I mean, humans are part of nature.
Yes.
And so that is wildlife. So you couldn't separate wildlife and humans. If humans are part of wildlife nature. And so if you say, you humans get out of here because this area is for hunting primarily, then you're technically not conserving. You're only selecting a specific purpose for what you want out of that land, which would be ultimately hunting.
Okay, do that one more time.
So you know colonialism, right?
Yes.
So
I'm trying to find the relevance. I'm trying to find the relevance of what you're saying to what we're talking about.
well, if we're trying to conserve,
If someone else can join in too.
yeah, well, if
You know.
conservation would imply conserving the land. Well, the original humans who were on that land were Native Americans.
Well, there were other, there have been different cultures that have occupied areas at different times, yes. All right,
Indigenous,
so,
like indigenous people that used to live here 15, 30,000 years ago.
sure, yes.
Right, and some of those people still today, if you talk to them today, they'll say that this is like just a gimmick for white people to go hunting. And so how do you,
Actually, I just met with the Alabama Coushatta tribe just recently. I have a very good relationship with the AC tribe. And we had this exact discussion not too long ago. I don't want to say you're off on that, but different people and different groups and different things are going to have different opinions on everything. That's when we get to the ethics part. Then we start talking about what is an ethic. An ethic is what is true at the time, at the place. You know, it's very difficult, which I'm going to go into some history of wildlife laws. And I get the same thing every talk that I give. Well, how does that take into consideration Native Americans? It doesn't. It also doesn't take into consideration my ancestors that were here in the US, because it has to do with landowners. It has to do with a certain group, a certain class. So, yeah.
just to make it plain here, Native Americans that are registered on the DAWS roll.
Yes.
We carry what's called a card,
Yes.
and that does give us, if requested, certain elevated liberties for hunting, fishing, gathering, etc.
Yes.
You know, I can go with my tribe to certain areas here. Or I can request another tribe and they can tell me no. But it's like he's trying to explain, this doesn't have anything to do with where we are today, with how the lands are managed and conserved, and the conservation efforts. The bottom line is exactly correct, that it is the hunters and fishery that are the greatest contributors. But I will say, I have been to some amazing fishing holes that none of y'all will ever get.
I can. Yes.
I think that's what I'm trying to convey, is the curiosity of people like me who got kicked for many years ago. But we weren't, kind of, sort of, yes, we were, but that's the way human society has evolved, and it hasn't been pretty. Has anybody watched 1923?
Yeah.
Okay. It's just real hard. However, we as a society can just grow and learn and do better. Yes.
Yes.
So, carry on. I would say far too much.
Sorry, not to put you on the spot or anything.
Oh,
Just
just
trying
trying
to.
to get deeper. I want things personal. I still hold my opinion. I mean, maybe it's something that consciously we're not able to see together. But there are, there is a community of people that would also.
Again, and that's the whole point of this whole lecture, is exactly what you're talking about. Is an ethic, an idea.
Ready?
Yeah. This is to go back to your question. Trust me, we're going to get back into this again. Don't go away. To go back to your question, Dingell-Johnson Act, Federally Support Fish Restoration Act, excise tax on fishing equipment, and 3% tax on electric trolling motors and sonar fishing finders. That's where fisheries get their money. They get their money from the Dingell-Johnson Act. The Dingell-Hart Bill, a 10% excise tax on handguns available for wildlife restoration. The Dingell-Goodling Bill, 11% excise tax on archery equipment. The Wallet-Bro Bill. Have you noticed a trend in this? The Dingells.
Lots of Dingles.
The Dingells, and so you're looking at father, son, and
Holy
that's
Ghost.
John Dingell's wife or widow. And carrying on the family tradition, Representative Debbie Dingell was the author and co-author of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. So the Dingells have had a illustrious history in enacting acts to fund wildlife management and wildland conservation throughout the U.S. Okay, now here we're going to start getting really sticky. I can tell that already. Who owns wildlife?
We do.
People.
The government.
The first known wildlife regulation was in the Magna Carta. And it essentially placed royal control, absolute royal authority on all wildlife. How many in here have heard the story of Robin Hood? All right. What did Robin Hood do? He robbed from the rich and gave to the poor. That's the Disney version of Robin Hood. Robin Hood was being pursued by the sheriff of Nottingham because he poached the king's deer. Yes. He poached the king's, he was a poacher. And that's the story of Robin Hood, is he was a poacher. He poached the king's deer. In the colonial ordinance of 1647, it reinforced governmental authority and oversight of wildlife, but established the citizens of the colonies as the ownership of wildlife. The people own the wildlife. The government regulates the wildlife. And that's how it is to this day. To this day, the deer in the state of Texas belong to the citizens of the state of Texas. They're regulated by the state. So the state, and the reason that they're regulated by the state is because prior to this, we didn't have laws saying that the government regulates taking of a species. Therefore, we turn, the 80 million strong herds of buffalo into nothing because there was no regulation. It was seeing that, and it was the extirpation of white-tailed deer, believe it or not, from the state of Texas. There was at one point that there were almost no white-tailed deer in the state of Texas because there was no regulation on hunting. You could go and take all you wanted, as much as you want. It didn't matter. If it was just for hide and leave the rest of it sitting there to rot, that's fine. It was just because you didn't want to look at a deer, so you shot it and it's dead and it's laying there and it rots away, fine, whatever. Well, we to this day have game laws in the state of Texas that say, number one, we do, kind of give you a background on how these numbers come to be. We have RMUs. These are resource management units in the state of Texas. And they're all set up as different units throughout the state. In these units, surveys are done on wildlife populations. When those surveys are done, we can then go through and figure how many of this species can be taken and still have a good, healthy population to remain. So that's why you get a hunting license, and that's when you get tags. So you get doe tags or buck tags or whatever, and each person is allowed to take a certain amount. Depends on where you are, depends on what county you're in, and it depends on the year, because the years can change. You may have a great year and fawn rates are just out of control. Could be very slim years. After the drought, numbers went down. So, and we also have what's called a waste of game law in the state of Texas, which says that if you take a deer, you have to use and consume the deer. You cannot let it just sit. You just can't go up, shoot a deer and let it lay there and rot. That's called a waste of game. You can take it, you can process it yourself, you can process it at a facility. You can give it to your neighbors, you can give it to the poor, you can give it to yourself, but the game cannot be wasted. And that's with all game species. You also can't trap game species. So you can't use traps to get game species. An interesting one is squirrels are actually a game species also.
That was only in Arkansas.
Yep, they are a game species.
Have you seen people shooting squirrels?
What else does it take to make a meal? I really am curious.
Uh,
I've never spent something I've never.
If you're just eating a squirrel itself, 2 or 3, if you're making like dumplings or stew or something like that, 1. Yeah. They're actually not bad. Yeah, they're actually not bad. But yes, there is squirrel season. It is a high bag limit. It's like 10 a day through the season. I'm sorry.
We have one in our ad. You can come get.
And that's the interesting thing. Technically, you can't put a trap out for it because it's a game animal.
So it's eating the-
But there is an unwritten rule of exception. There's like an unwritten rule of exception that if it's in your house, you can trap it and remove it. There's not a game warden sitting across from your house. Ooh. Squirrel just went into their house. I'm gonna wait for them to put a trap out for it. All right. History of wildlife laws, and this is one question that I when we're talking about the ownership of wildlife. And this is a question I would get, especially when it came to indigenous people. Well, were indigenous people taken into consideration when these regulations were written? Nope. Sure the hell weren't. Nope. My great-grandparents were taken into consideration either. You know, because my great-grandparents didn't own property. These were for landowners. These laws were for landowners. Voting was for landowners. You didn't own land, you didn't vote. So were African Americans taken into consideration for this? Were Native Americans taken into consideration for this? Hell no. Because you didn't exist. They didn't exist. They were merely a blight in their eyes. So it didn't matter. But at the same time, it didn't matter to my family didn't matter either. And I'd probably guess that most of the people in here's family didn't matter when it came to writing these laws. Anyhow, I like this one. 1861 first game law in Texas established a 2-year closed season on northern bobwhite Galveston Island. A lot of people are like, oh, wow, the first one was first regulation was bobwhite quail. My thing is, there were bobwhite quail on Galveston Island? Wow. I never knew that.
Just a quick question on the trapping.
Yes.
So when like, there's companies that come out and do like raccoon and squirrel removal and stuff in houses, do they have to get a stamp or a permit?
They have to be permitted to, yes, they have to be permitted. Yeah. They have to be permitted. They also have to have a fur bearer permit, because even just trapping a raccoon and possessing it, even for that amount of time, it's a fur bearer, you have to have a fur bearer permit.
So those go back into the program.
Yes. Anytime that somebody calls me up and says, I have squirrels or something in my house, I tell them, call someone like 911 Wildlife or Critter Getters or somebody, because they've got all of that stuff. They have all of the equipment, you know, and by the time you go down to Ace Hardware and buy you a couple Have-A-Heart traps and you get yourself bitten 3 or 4 times, climbing up in your attic and sticking your head on the nails that go through the roof, which I've done many times. It's easier just to pay somebody a couple $100 to come get it out of your roof, and then they'll go through and find where it's getting in and plug up your holes. Now, is that going to keep them from getting back in? Nope, they'll get right back in. But at least maybe they'll take root in your neighbor's house. In 1897, Texas enacts general game laws. In 1880, 130 counties claim exemption to the game laws. Typical Texas.
What was the reason? I'm sorry.
The reason that they, the reason they claimed exemption for many reasons, and mainly it's different here than there. And my papa owns this county. So how can you come in and say, I could do this, that, and the other in my county? kind of thing, yeah. In 1859, the Fish and Oyster Commission was established in the state of Texas. So the first big regulatory conservation agency in the state of Texas was the Fish and Oyster Commission. Oysters are still a huge agricultural commodity for the state of Texas. In 1900, the Lacey Act prohibited the interstate transfer of wildlife. Basically because there were so many different laws in so many different states and so many different places, so many, different laws everywhere, that the Lacey Act was put into effect to regulate the movement of wildlife between states. So it may be legal for you to hunt elk in Colorado, but you need to abide by the laws and regulations of Colorado. You can go hunt elk there, but you have to go through their permitting system and pay their fees and everything in order to hunt. Most places like that have in-state and out-of-state fees. So if you're a taxpayer in Colorado, then you're not going to pay as much as someone from Texas, and vice versa. That was just basically everything I just said. The 1916 passage of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act between the US and Canada. This was one of the first pieces of legislation that really looked at a species above an individual. Most wildlife laws are written toward the individual. It's illegal for you to shoot a deer, a white-tailed deer. And they're really it's really focused on the individual. It's not really focused on the population as a whole. It's focused on the individual. It was the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act that really started looking at the species as a whole. So let's just take, for example, snow geese. Snow geese are one of the longest migratory birds in the world. They can migrate up to 3,000 miles. So from the Arctic area of Canada down into Mexico and Central America. Okay, let's say that all lined up along the US border are hunters all sitting there with a gun waiting for the snow geese. And as soon as they come over the border, boom, 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 it's like, a cartoon where the sky is full of smoke and feathers start coming up and start falling down. Does the US have the right to annihilate snow geese from the world if they're a multinational bird? So that's what brought about the passage of this particular act. But it doesn't just cover migratory birds. It covers cardinals and blue jays, which are not migratory birds. They're residential birds. They're going to be the birds that are right around here. Cardinals aren't going to fly up to Calgary once a year and fly back down here. They're residential birds. Turkeys are residential birds. They're not moving around. They'll have, these birds will have minor migratory paths within a certain area, or they may migrate within a small area, but they are also covered. So any native bird to North America is covered under this act. I say turkeys. All right, turkeys. If you say people hunt turkeys all the time, yes, you get that hunting permit and you get a turkey stamp on it. And so that's how you're able to hunt turkey. That's how you get it. You get it because you have a permit. You have a permit to own that turkey. All right, we went over all of that. What is an ethic? Here's the fun part. Um, I like this. It's, you know, it's a person's conduct deemed acceptable by a culture, by ethics or philosophy. Ethics change from that chair to that chair. Ethics change from standing in here to standing outside. You know, if we were standing outside and having this lecture, it'd be more likely that everybody be sitting here chatting with each other, you know, or going, ooh, squirrel. You know, but in here, that would be considered rude if you're sitting there talking to the person right beside you. But if you were outside and we're sitting there talking and you're in the back of the, you know, you're in the back of the field trip and everything, and you're sitting there, oh, look, it's harvester ants. Hey, everybody, come look at this. I know what these are. You know what they do? They do this, 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 this. While the person up there who's leading your field trip is trying to tell you probably about harvester ants. So ethics are very fluid and they can change per situation. Your personal ethic consists of what you do in the woods when nobody's looking. How many times have you heard it's only illegal if you're caught? You know, what's right? It's not the same. The right is not the same for everyone. Right is not the same in every household. Right is not, you know, that is, it's a very fluid idea. What we may think of as being perfectly right and perfectly normal, another group may see it as treachery. You know, and then even within that group, some people may say it's wonderful, some people may say it's not. Go back to the meeting I just had with the Alabama Coushatta tribe and talking with them specifically about the reservation. And the idea that they used to do these, they used to have like a mock village, and they would do ritual, they would demonstrate ritual dances and all such as that. I asked Brian, who was the representative, I said, they stopped doing it. They stopped doing it probably 10 years or so, 10, 15 years ago or so. And I said, why did you stop doing it? Was it, you know, did you feel you were just, you know, some dog and pony show for a bunch of white people? I mean, why did you stop doing it? And you know what his answer was? It wasn't economically viable for us to keep doing it. Had absolutely nothing to do with exploiting a culture. It had absolutely nothing to do with, you know, people saying, no, well, we don't want this, that, and the other. It had to do with, it wasn't economically feasible for them to keep doing it. To have the, you know, to run the village and to have the arena where they did the dances and all that. It wasn't economically viable for them to keep doing it. The idea was they were trying to create a tourist corridor along that Highway 190 between Woodville and Livingston. So they opened the Picket House restaurant. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area up there, but they put the Picket House restaurant and the Heritage Village there and all of this other stuff. And the idea was to open up kind of this little tourist corridor, and it just didn't go over. It didn't go over well. So they opted then to open Naskell, which is a casino. So they opted to open the casino as opposed to having the village and the dances and doing all that, because they just said it just wasn't economically feasible for them to continue doing that. I went up there as a kid, and I remember going as a kid through the village and, you know, joining in the friendship dance at the end of everything. But it was really interesting because I'd grown up my whole life knowing about the tribe, but it wasn't until recently that I knew the tribe. And it was an eye-opening experience. It was an eye-opening experience for many reasons. Some reasons I can't get into right now. But it was a really eye-opening experience to know what that particular group has been through over the past 150, 200 years that they have been in Texas. All right, let's look at this. Ethically, is that okay?
Maybe. There are animals that have been rehabbed, but for physical reasons cannot be returned to the wild. And those, it's okay to habituate them to people and use them for learning experiences.
All right, anyone else?
My uncle had one of those one time, and when, after it reached puberty, it bit the crap out of
I actually had one too. My dog got to the mother and there were some kits left in my barn. And so I raised them and I don't. They are a wild animal and male raccoons can get 40 pounds, 40 plus pounds. And if you have a male raccoon that is dead set determined that he's going to get in your house and into the cabinet where the cat food is, his ass is getting in the house and into the cabinet where the cat food is. And you're not stopping it either. They are worse than cats when it comes to grabbing, because you can grab them by the back and just squash up as much skin as you possibly can. Pick it up and its legs are still on the ground. And so you're trying to, he's coming in this way, you're reaching in and grabbing and trying to throw them back out the door. It doesn't work. My advice, stay away from raccoons, because at any second, this one might decide, you don't need that ear. Somebody had any comment? I think you had your hand up first.
In Korea and Asian countries, they have raccoon cafes.
Yeah, interesting. It's actually a very interesting story about that. We always sit here and we complain about the invasive species that we have here that came from this country or that country or the other. We have invasive species that have made their way into those countries also, one of which is Japan. Raccoons are an invasive species and a nuisance species in Japan. It has to do with a story, a book that was around, I believe it was maybe in the 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, about this girl that had a pet raccoon. And Japanese people fell in love with this book, fell in love with this story. And so they all started getting raccoons. They decided to end the series of children's books. You know how the story ended with the little girl and the raccoon? She let it go. She let it be free. So now all these people released raccoons into Japan, and they're taking up residence in these 500,000-800,000-year-old temples and destroying them. Just absolutely destroying them. Yeah, so. All right, what about this? Is this okay?
I guess the question is it ethical because are you interfering with the circle of life at this point? Because, or are you doing a farming practice? You know, it's really kind of a gray area. Because at that point, are you like the raccoon? If you're, like she said, if you raise that to help rehabilitate it back into the wildlife, are you now interfering with the circle of life? And if you ask that question, we'll look at all of our zoos and stuff. Are you now interfering with the circle of life that way on the ethics point, or are you trying to conserve nature?
You know, I mean, that's a good question. And it's interesting that you bring up zoos. I've been meaning to add a photo to this. And one of them was the entrance to the Houston Zoo, or the entrance to any zoo. Some people look at zoos as being this cruel, inhuman place that people have forced animals and put them in cages. Other people may look at it as, hey, I'm doing what I'm doing today because I went to zoos and it piqued my interest. And therefore, the education that I got from zoos got me into what I'm doing today. And then the other person, myself, looks at zoos and say, hey, some zoos are saving the DNA of species that may no longer exist or could not exist, may not exist in the next 15, 20, 30 years. I point out one place, the Texas Zoo in Victoria, Texas. Anybody ever been there? Right. It's supposed to be the Texas State Zoo. It's supposed to be dedicated to native animals. They kind of strayed away from that. Funding isn't the best for it, but, and I encourage everyone in this room to do this before it's too late, they have the most endangered canid species in the world is at the Victoria Zoo, the red wolf. One of the last remaining red wolves is at the Victoria Zoo. If you want to see a species that probably within all of our lifetime that's in here will probably be extinct. Probably within, functionally, genetically, they are extinct. Genetically, there are not enough of them left on this earth to keep the population going. I believe there's maybe 14 left on earth. And one of them is at the Victoria Zoo. And so I highly recommend folks go down and take a look. Take some friends with you too and say, hey, you know what? This isn't going to be here in 20 years. This species is not going to be here in 20 years. So kind of an eye-opening experience too, to go down and see it. All right, back to this. Yes or no? It's his property. He wants to throw corn out for deer. He can throw corn out for deer. It's his property. It's Texas. No opinion whatsoever?
No, it's gonna take a lot of farming farmage.
You say no?
I say no.
Any particular reason no?
But he may also be harvesting that corn for his own family too, you never know. Because at that point, you're not saying farming.
That's not, he's not.
It's just a picture. That
That's why he's doing it. Is he-
He's gonna bring in rats and.
Yeah, but if it's his land. Why not?
Who said that?
Me, if
All right,
it's his land.
say it again.
If it's his land. I mean, I feed the birds, my neighbors don't, but I do. And it's my land.
Hey, it's a valid argument. Now, you want my opinion? No, I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong for many reasons. Number one, I look at that and go, but I know probably a bit more about deer biology than probably most people in this room do. And I know and understand how deer eat. And I understand deer gut bacteria and things like that. Certain times of the year, deer have a gut bacteria that breaks down that breaks down starches. So it breaks down starches very easy, and that's like spring, summertime, when there's a little small forbs that they can eat and chew up and great. You start hitting the fall and winter, you don't have those nice succulent little forbs that are all over the. By the way, deer are browsers. They're not grazers. They eat like weeds. They don't eat grasses. And then come winter, there's not a lot of that on the ground. So they start feeding on the tips of bushes. That's how we do deer surveys. We go and you have a little clicker, number clicker, and we go up to a bush and we look at it and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we count the number of nips that we find on bushes. You ever heard of a browse line? Where you're driving around somewhere, especially in central Texas, where they high fence everything and stick as many deer in there as they possibly can. And you look around and everything from this point down is denuded. It's because deer have eaten it as high up as they could eat. But their gut bacteria changes to a bacteria that's better suited at breaking down cellulose. So plant cellulose, that tough part When you bite a piece of celery, the little stringy veins from it, it breaks down that stuff more. So you start giving deer like this. When do most people start feeding deer corn? In the fall, right before hunting season, to bait deer into a particular location. Think of that as each one of those as a different color. Taste the rainbow. Think of that as like Skittles, and somebody just goes out and those Skittles out in the middle of an area. Deer love that. They're going to eat that over something else. But the gut bacteria that they have is not the best for breaking down starch, which is the majority of what you're going to have here. So it can actually sit in their gut and it can ferment. Actually cause it can actually cause issues of malnutrition. Not only that is there is a fungus that grows on deer corn or on corn that releases, it's called an aflatoxin. And this aflatoxin is extremely toxic to birds. So a couple of crows fly down there, some blue jays fly down there. They eat some of that corn, and it can have the aflatoxin on it and kill them. Now, that aflatoxin just goes crazy in warm, humid conditions. Where do you see these bags of corn? Sitting right outside in August, in the sun, in the humidity, getting rained on. Yeah, issues. Yes, ma'am.
How does that gut bacteria thing work with acres? Because in the fall, they're eating acorns.
Yes, you can actually have, there is actually a condition that deers get from eating too many acorns. Yeah, it's actually toxic to them to eat too many acorns too. It escapes me right at this minute what it's called. And if you hadn't asked me about it, I could have told you exactly what the tannic something poisoning.
So Helen, what do you want to accomplish that you're bringing deer chronic wasting disease?
Yep. That's the other issue. You're congregating. You congregate groups. You have a herd of deer over here, a herd of deer over here. East is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. You're now taking these two herds and you're putting them into a common area. Taking these three herds and putting them into a common area, or a representative from each one of these herds into a common area. One of them has CWD, chronic wasting disease, a fatal disease to whitetail deer. He now spreads it to this area, and it doesn't even have to be right then. CWD is a prion. It's an encapsulated bit of DNA, and it can sit on surfaces for long periods of time. So the deer may come up, nibble on the corn, he walks out, whoop, they take off. It's got CWD. 3 days later, another herd of deer come over and they're eating in that same area. They get the prion. Now they've got CWD and they're spreading it around to their area. Yes.
So this relates to bird feed. What I, yeah, basically that.
Okay, what about this picture? Is this okay or is this not okay? Exactly. How is it okay? How is it not okay here, but it's okay here?
Bird feeders, when you buy bird feed, sometimes there'll be fungus already in there.
Yeah.
They're basically open.
Yes.
And they're stored next to like all the chemicals.
Yeah, stored next there. I mean, and
It's hard to say, like, in a wild escape like that, sure, maybe we need to leave out bird seed in an urban area where you're trying to just give something back to birds. Like, is there an exception in those circumstances?
as a representative of Texas Parks and Wildlife,
Well, as a biologist, I guess I'm asking.
as a representative of Texas Parks and Wildlife, there is no law that says you cannot feed wildlife. No law whatsoever that says you cannot feed wildlife.
Sometimes you can't feed
If you want to feed Friskies to a raccoon, you can feed Friskies to a raccoon. There may be city ordinances that say you can't feed wildlife. Some city ordinances, there's the kicker. One of the biggest issues that we have working with a lot of what Diana and I do, we work with city governments on putting together ordinances in regards to wildlife. One of the issues that we have is putting forward wildlife feeding ordinances. Because everybody's like, well, I feed birds, I feed Muscovy ducks, I feed all this, that, and the other. So one of the ways around that is you make a city ordinance, but you make birds an exception. She might get me another cup of water. Water, please.
Water's coming down.
I'm getting to that point in the lecture to where I may have to hack myself through the rest of it. But there are no city ordinances, so there is no legal aspect of it. As a biologist, yes, I have a different slant on this too. But why would, okay, for the folks, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you said no to feeding deer, but you said that you, oh, no, that's right, that's his property, he can do whatever you want. You said no to feeding deer. What about the feeding birds?
I have no issue with that.
All right, you have no issue with it?
Not with this scenario.
All right.
Same situation.
Why? Why is it okay? Thank you very much. Why is it okay to feed birds but not white-tailed deer?
Well, you ultimately are feeding birds if you put the corn down.
Yeah, you're feeding just about everything.
I'm going to say the problem is feeding anything corn.
Yeah, it's gonna feed anything corn.
People, animals, birds.
Here, oh, go ahead.
You could argue that, I'm not saying I'm on any side of this. It's not- So, like, from my viewpoint, I don't think birds will do that. Like, but I work at Mercer and we have bird feeders. And in our climate where we're at, and birds are migrating, they don't have the proper places to stop and find natural resources like they used to. So humans have grown that and introduced it in a way that when they are migrating or just in the area, they have a credible food source. At the same time, I can see that being an argument why people want to feed the birds. Because there's not a natural source for their food there. And they're just trying to maintain the population that they have in the area.
Yep. Valid argument. Where he says he's neutral, I'm devil's advocate. I'm gonna cause a problem. I am gonna purposely cause a problem. And then I'm gonna give you my opinion at the end of it. So do you want to hear my opinion on this? No, I don't like it. Nope, I don't like it. I don't like it in urban settings. I don't like it in any settings. And it has to do with, who said it earlier? Congregating. Exactly. So Carolyn said, it's congregation. Especially now with like avian flu and other bird maladies going around right now. You don't want to do this. You don't want to gather flocks together. You don't want to gather birds together at a place where these diseases or whatever may linger for long periods of time. You know what I would like to see there? That looks like hill country. Yeah, hill country's okay. I'm from East Texas. I grew up right here. I actually grew up in a little town called Cut and Shoot. Right down the road from here, actually, I grew up. So I'm thinking of Cut and Shoot. I was do this at Cut and Shoot. You know what I'd rather see there? Yopon, a female yopon, a beauty berry, a row of beauty berries, row of yopon. Even though I grew up, I grew up on with cows and horses and stuff, to where we removed all the yopon everywhere. I'd love to see yopon there. I would love to see coral bean, you know, anything like that, as opposed to a bird feeder. So I say, Karen,
I get to be devil's advocate the other way. Project Reader Watch relies on citizen science to determine what kinds of birds are coming to an area based on what you find about in the feeder.
absolutely.
So, and we're talking about the diseases. Was it 2 or 3 years back that there was some fungus or something? that was
Yes.
going around, bacteria that was going around, and we have to take all of our fingers down.
Yep.
Because you could see those sweet little birds coming to the bird feeder and just sitting there and just all fluffed up and not feeling well. Had to put away the bird bath, everything, because it was really bad.
And you know what I hate worse than that? Absolutely hate worse than that, and wished I could drive by every home and rip them down and stomp them in the ground. Hummingbird feeders. Nobody takes care of them properly. Nobody. You have to change and clean them every day. Every day. And so I hate seeing them up anywhere because I know people are not taking the time of getting a little bottle brush and cleaning every one of those little tubes and every one of those little, if you got the flowers on them, pull the flowers off. Those don't do any good. They'll go right straight to that little tube and drink directly out of the little tube.
You
Yes, sir.
mentioned like the avian flu, wouldn't we want to put like, say, like the chicken houses and animal agriculture on the last two, other than the bird feeder that is?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But like, how would you then bring that sort of awareness to the public, aside from like the bird feeder? You know, how do you think that would be large scale solution?
That's what everybody in this room is for. Education is the biggest thing. Education, you going home and telling 2 people about the lectures you heard today and the things that you heard today. The biggest aspect, and that's why I love this, I have dedicated myself to the Texas Master Naturalist Program. Diana is the advisor here. I'm the advisor down in Houston. I am actively involved in the training. I pick the training classes. I help pick the people. I do 6 training classes for them. I'm totally dedicated to this because it's education. It's getting the word out. It's getting these messages across to people that they'll eventually filter their way to the people that need to hear it, unless they're just totally. All right, we need to unfortunately talk a little bit about who you want to be in this class. This is much more of the finger wagging part of it. This basically, what I'm going to tell you after this is, or from this point forward, if we have enough time, we'll go back a little bit more into the fun stuff. But I want to end it on this. You have to understand the Master Naturalist Program. Yes, it's called Certified Master Naturalist, but you're not certified. There's no certification to it. It's not like you're going and getting an HVAC certification and you can go out and work on air conditioners, or a welding certification and you go out and be a welder. This isn't a certification where you could go out and wrestle alligators and collect bird feathers and all things like that. Wildlife regulations and wildlife laws apply to you the same way before you entered this program to when you get your first certification. There is no difference. There is no difference. You don't get a special permit to collect anything or do anything. This is simply a class to educate you on the environment, the ecology around you, to help you go out and be a volunteer, to help you go out and make a difference. That's what this class is meant for. It isn't a certification program. Going through this, you have to be certified one way or the other sometimes, trust me.
Certifiable.
Certifiable, exactly. But this is simply the whole program was put together because Texas Parks and Wildlife had a lot of people that wanted to volunteer and help out and do things. But especially in where we're at here, more so down where I'm at than here. But most of our volunteers were retired chemical or aerospace engineer. So you either worked at a chemical plant or you worked at NASA. And then after that, you retired, you wanted to do some stuff. Oh, I love the outdoors. I love camping. I love all of this. So let's go volunteer for Parks and Wildlife and try to help out with things. Well, they would get there and they'd be like, and they had no clue about the environment, the ecosystem around. So that's why this was put together to train volunteers, to help train volunteers to give you that basic knowledge that you need. But like I said, and I will emphasize this over and over and over, it doesn't give you any special privilege when it comes to wildlife or to handling wildlife or hunting or anything like that. There are certain things that you, like we were talking about earlier, I went into the whole thing about how I cannot do A, B, and C because I am an employee of the state that is paid for by federal dollars. Therefore, there's certain things I can't do. I can't go as a Parks and Wildlife employee to a Beto rally and jump up and down and scream and say, Texas Parks and Wildlife supports. No, Texas Parks and Wildlife does not support anything. Well, we're not supposed to support anyone. It's supposed to be a neutral agency. We are a neutral agency that has a commission that is appointed by the governor. And everything that we do has to go through the commission. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna ask that. I said your organizational chart, the very top person
Is the governor, yes.
of Texas.
Yes.
So how can?
But we can't, with the Texas Parks and Wildlife isn't gonna, come out and say, oh, we endorse Joe to be governor. We can't do that.
On the other side, for instance, I have a pesticide license for the state of Texas. And to be honest, as an immigrant, the first time I learned about milkweed was as a pest. So the state of Texas pesticide, permitting office considers a native, plant a pest. And so how can you possibly, if you're neutral, how can you make grounds into the positive direction without potentially, say, calling another organization out that is selling chemicals to destroy the bases, for native wildlife to occur, like handing out pesticide license to eradicate.
We are allowed as Texas Parks and Wildlife to disseminate fact to the public. We can tell you all the scientific fact that we have our knowledge of. What you're talking about is the Texas Department of Agriculture. Texas Department of Agriculture has deemed certain plants to be noxious weeds in regards to agricultural applications, either for cattle or for land use for food stuff. One of which is the yellow bull thistle. See the yellow bull thistle around, puts on that massive rosette about this big, spiny leaves on it, shoots up a petiole about this tall with this old shaving brush looking flower on top of it. That is deemed by the TDA as a noxious weed. It's not. It's a very important prairie plant. It is the greatest pollinator plant we could possibly have around here. I mean, I've seen butterflies and flies and beetles and everything crawling around in the flower head of that. But it's considered a noxious weed according to TDA. As Texas Parks and Wildlife, I can tell you that in prairie restoration projects, milkweed and bull thistle are very important aspects to the diversity of a prairie. Nothing political about that. I'm just simply giving you the fact. And I can do that. If there's a development going on, I can give you the facts on how this is going to affect A, B, C, and D. I can't go up to you and say, Parks and Wildlife says you cannot do this. You cannot build that building. You cannot make that, you cannot build that subdivision or whatever. But if asked as a biologist with Texas Parks and Wildlife, what would be the ramifications of building this, and this? Yes, you will destroy red truncated woodpecker habitat. You will destroy habitat for this. You will this, and this. This is what you can affect. These are the facts. I can give you all the facts that you want. I can't give you an opinion when it comes to things like that. I can give you facts when it comes to political things like that. I can give you the facts. When it comes to trap, neuter, release, when it comes to feral cat colonies, when it comes to things like that, we can give you the facts. We have it. If you want it, we have much like what you see here with the coyote thing, we have Parks and Wildlife official stance on TNR. But the city of Houston funds TNR. As Parks and Wildlife, I can't go up to the city of Houston and go, you can't do that. I can't do that. Texas Parks and Wildlife can't do that. But we can say, this is what happens. These are the facts when it comes to this, that, and the other. Sometimes the facts can change minds. Sometimes the facts won't change minds. As a matter of fact, facts usually, and this is a very interesting, actually came out before I started as a wildlife biologist. I was actually a lobbyist and a political advisor before I actually started doing this. And you want to know something very interesting? If you have someone that has something set in their mind, that's what they think, you know, the worst thing to do is argue against them, because you're going to ingrain them into their belief even more. You know, and especially when it comes to religion and politics, those are the two things that if you argue a point with someone, it's one thing discussing, it's one thing talking fact. But if you start talking to someone about it, you will ingrain them into their belief even more. And that's just how us lovely humans work. That's how we work. But that also flows over into this group. You cannot, as a Texas master naturalist, represent yourself as a Texas master naturalist for any political group or political organization. You can't do it. You as an individual citizen can do whatever you want. That's your choice. You can do whatever you want. You could go, you know, MAGA for Trump, or you can go out and campaign for Beto or Sheila Jackson Lee or, you know, Dan Crenshaw. You can do whatever you want. You are free as a private citizen to do whatever you want. I am free as a private citizen to do whatever I want. I have to step a little more lightly than others because I'm known. People know who I am. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm not wearing Texas Parks and Wildlife. You know, I used to be very active on my community Facebook page and talking about stuff. I have to stop doing it because everybody in my community knows who I am. So everything I say goes right back to Parks and Wildlife. Everything I say goes right back to Parks and Wildlife. Now, what I mean by that is, if Carolyn, would y'all mind standing up for a second and modeling for us? I'm saying you cannot go to a political rally wearing that.
I'm wearing this, and I can't go up to you and say, as a Texas master naturalist, I think you need to know that the person for this job
Yep.
is going to be.
So-and-so. You can't do it.
You can't do that.
You can't do that.
You can't say, if I'm not wearing this, go up to people and say, I'm a Texas master naturalist, so I know better than all of you here that this is how you should act in your own backyard.
Yep.
Right?
You can't do that. Now, the thing is, you know, are you gonna be fined or whatever for doing anything like that? Most likely what would happen if it got back around to the board would, or this would be my advice to my board, would be take them aside, say, hey, we can't do this because this is a governmental organization. Yes, this program is a governmental organization. We cannot do this. Could you please cease and desist what you're doing? Thank you very much. Here's your little pen. All right, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. If you then run out right after that to another rally and say, I'm a Texas master naturalist, you're on the front page of the Conroe Courier with your, you know, with your shirt on or anything, then probably the next step is going to be, you're going to be removed from the group. You're going to be exiled from the group. Yes, you'll be voted off the island. But unfortunately, there's not going to be anybody there that can vote for you. Everybody is going to be voting against you. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question, Master Gardner, and hopefully when I'm finished, I'll be Master Naturalist, but the whole neighborhood knows, you know what I mean? You know, when you're out in the street, they, oh, what's wrong with this and what's wrong with that? Same thing, right? Because you don't
Absolutely.
have a place where I can take like the soil or the St. Augustine to put it under a microscope to find out what's wrong before I say something wrong.
Yeah.
You do.
Oh, yeah. Yes, what you need to do is you need to, if you have, we've tried this down in our, in our chapter, and I'd like to do it again, and I'd like to bring in all the other chapters. We brought in all the other chapters last time on this, a public speaking forum, where we brought in folks from Parks and Wildlife and our HR department to teach folks how to be public speakers and things like that. If you plan on doing something like that, if you would like to do anything like that, then you would put through your program or whatever you would like to go. I've been asked to do this. I've been asked to give a presentation on butterfly gardens. If the board says, don't worry about it, we know you, we've talked to you, we've seen your presentation, or go for it, you're fine. But your first time doing it, you want to do it, I'd run it through the board. I just simply an email. What's your, is it like board members at whatever?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Yeah, I would just run it through and say, hey, I would like to do this. What do you think? You know, so do something like that. Things that I advise a master naturalist to stay away from are certain subjects. Urban deer, urban coyote, anything like that, I really suggest you stay away from. Call up one of us if you have issues like that, call up one of us, because you're starting to get into regulatory issues. And you don't want to start getting into regulatory, stay as far away from regulatory issues as you can. Stay as far away from controversial issues as you possibly can. Because trust me, when you get in a room of 60, 70 people and they all have daggers in their eyes for you, it's not a place that you want to be. And it takes a lot of, I don't even want to say training, it takes a lot of experience to deal with a situation like that, to where it not get totally out of control. And coyote, feral cats, coyote and feral cats are the two biggest ones right now. White-tailed deer is kind of leveled off a little bit more.
Wall and border.
The border wall, yeah, anything like that, that's anything like that, I suggest that you, if anybody asks you to talk about anything like that, I would suggest you first put it through the board, and then the board will likely contact Diana or somebody and say, what do you think? Should we really, should we breach this subject?
So would you want to say, if you are gonna get involved in a discussion like that, say, well, I am a Texas Master Naturalist, but I am not speaking for the Texas Master Naturalist group. I'm speaking for myself as an individual.
You can describe yourself, you can say you're a naturalist. The issue is, the biggest thing is that you can stand up for me, Carolyn. All right, I'm gonna do this, hold on. See that right here? See that? That's trademark.
You know, I've never had a red, me before. And I picture all those movies where a bullet follows.
We're gonna get into that also. The name Texas Master Naturalist and the dragonfly and all that are those are trademark. So you can present yourself as a naturalist. I am a naturalist. I have had training through school and advanced training on these issues. That's fine to say because you are a naturalist and you have had training, but you cannot represent yourself as a Texas Master Naturalist unless it is a program or a group or something that has been pre-checked by the program itself. Y'all have it somewhere where on the, have y'all gone over VMS and all of that yet?
Yes.
So there should be a list of things in there that are already pre-approved. If something's not in there, then you need to pass it through your board to make sure that it is acceptable. There are some things that are acceptable. There's some things that are not acceptable. They have to follow the mission of the Master Naturalist program before they can be okay. Every chapter has one or two that are right on that border that I would go, but a lot of times I go, 99% of what you're doing is okay. This one little thing that's really walking the line, I'm okay if it's making people happy. If people are happy, I'm good with that.
So I think part of Ruth's question was when she's walking around the neighborhood and someone comes up to her and says, come see this plan, it's done, what should I do? And, and being able to share with that information that she has, or where does she go for more information? And what you said about being part of the master garden. Right, so the master garden. No, you just refer them because we do know who the experts are. So if somebody was to come to me and say, there's a bat in my yard, what do I do? I would call Diana. There's somebody, so, we're learning who the experts are that we can rely on. And just because someone asks you a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have
Yes,
to be.
trust me.
Even though we do have a lot of that knowledge because of the training we're getting. It's so they don't come back, you killed my dog.
Yes.
It's always
Yes.
so much better to rely to refer them to the experts.
Yes.
We're.
And
not
that's
that.
like-
My little
Answer is, let me check on it and I'll get back to you.
Yes,
Or-
I can
or
tell you
let
that.
me give you the name of somebody.
Yeah, I can tell you that for sure. Trust me, in as many groups as I've been in front of, as many talks that I have given, as many things that I've done, as smart as I seem, trust me, there's probably just as many or more questions that I've been asked that I don't know the answer to. And my response is, you know what? Good question. I don't quite know the answer. I know somebody that does. If you want me to, I can get you in touch with them, or you can give me send me an email. And this is for everybody in the room. You can send me an email. You just go to any of the counties in the 9-county area of Houston and go to find a biologist, and you can put in any one of these counties and my name will show up and Diana's name will show up if you don't have our email address. Look, she had a question back here first.
Make a note that on page 708 in our textbooks, there's a chart here with an if this happens.
Yeah,
Then
that's,
there's a phone number to Texas wild animals for the concept or, you know, readout. Anyway, there's a wealth of information right there in our textbook.
Yeah.
It's a great guide.
And real quick, we need to move, let's go ahead and move forward. Also, this is important too. As I was talking about earlier, these are trademarked, I always want to say butterfly, the dragonfly, and the Texas Master Naturalist, those are all trademarked. You cannot use them for your personal business. You can't put them on a business card. You can't put them on a flyer. You can't say, you know, I'm going to open Joe's Native Landscaping. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put, you know, I'm going to do an advertisement on Garden Line, you know, and you started off, hi, my name's Joe, and I am a certified Texas Master Naturalist here to tell you I know what I'm doing and I can do this and everything and blah, blah, blah. You can't do that. You can't do that. You cannot use it to promote your own personal business. Also, you cannot put it on a professional resume. You can put it on a resume under volunteer services, which I highly, highly, highly recommend people do, period. A lot of people don't think about that when they're putting together a resume. Put your volunteer, the organizations that you volunteer for, put them down. Definitely put those down. And if you want to put the Texas Master Naturalist program, don't put if it's how all applications are now. You do them online, and it may have a section there that says certifications. Don't put it under certifications because it's not a certification. You can put it under volunteer service work, Texas Master Naturalist program, member since 2023. You know, and that's perfectly fine. I guarantee you, if somebody looks at your resume and sees that, a lot of them will go, oh, they're a master naturalist. That tells them certain things. Tells them, one, that you've got training and you're dedicated. Especially if you are a participating member, let's say, of the organization. So definitely put it down. And then if they bring it up, you know, and if you're in the interview and they say something to you like, what's your experience with removal of invasive species shrubs? Well, as a master naturalist, I was involved in this project, this project, this project, and this project. What's your experience with native prairie restoration? Well, as a master naturalist, I worked on the Sheldon Lake Prairie Project for 3 years, for 5 years. That's perfectly fine to say. That, you know, that's fine. That's fine, but it's not a certification. It's not, like I said earlier, you can't go fix air conditioners after this. You know, this isn't an HVAC certification. This isn't some type of certification. This is simply membership to a club. This is something always to think about when you're doing any type of master naturalist work. If you are out, you know, anywhere with your shirt on and your name badge on, act as though a child's watching. You know, that's the biggest thing right there. If what you did, you think a kid's going to run up and go, Mommy, you should not believe what this person just did. Well, you probably did something you shouldn't have. You know, and I was a field biologist for a long time. And trust me, when I first came into this, and before that, I was in the political side, but I was in the smoky back room. I wasn't out in front. I wasn't running for office. I was the evil person in the back that was manipulating everybody that they didn't know they were being manipulated. It took me a little while to get this, to obtain this ethic. I dropped the F-bomb a lot of times in front of 5th graders. You know, so it's a tough one to do. Okay, let's go through this. Okay, just kind of give you an idea. This is my permit. As a Parks and Wildlife biologist, I work for the regulatory agency. I still have to have a permit. I still have to have a permit and I work for the regulatory agency. All right, but read the first line. Acting within the scope of his or her authority may take, transport, lease, or manage any of the wildlife, fish, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, the whole thing is one sentence. But the thing you look at is here, acting within the scope of his or her authority. My authority as Parks and Wildlife biologist stops as soon as I turn the key to my front door, walk in my door, and close it. I am a private citizen at that point. I can't have, eagle claws hanging from my ceiling. I can't have raccoons running around my house. I can't have any of that because it is not within the scope of my authority. That is only valid. Somebody calls me, hey, I have an alligator running around my house. What can I do? I may be able to go over there and get it and remove the alligator and take it somewhere and release it, which we really don't do. But it's totally acting within my scope of authority. Now, yes, I do have Texas tortoises in my backyard, but that's because there is nowhere else that they can go with someone who is permitted to have them. I am permitted to have them. So I am basically acting as a custodian under my authority with Texas Parks and Wildlife to house these tortoises until something else can be done with them. Whatever it may be, given to an accredited zoo, a rehab facility that houses and keeps these tortoises, or things like that. The issue is these guys can live 80 years. I'm retiring in 3. So as soon as I sign that release form with Texas Parks and Wildlife, I am illegally holding Texas tortoises. As soon as I sign that release. So before I sign that release, I've got to have something done with those tortoises that are in my backyard. Now, what can that be? Could I go to Parks and Wildlife and apply for a rehabber's license? Because I rehab these tortoises and release them? Is that a possibility? Yeah, that's a possibility. But I would have to do that as a private citizen. I could no longer do that as an employee of Texas Parks and Wildlife and be protected under my authority. Yes.
So if you had like a high ranch, like a high fence ranch, you have to have a permit to keep that wildlife on that ranch, or do you?
Nope.
own it at that point 'cause you own the property?
You do not have to have a permit to put a fence up, a high fence around your property. You do have to have a permit to cull the deer that are on that property. So if you want to cull the deer on that property, you enter something that's called the Managed Land Deer Permitting Program. And so you'll work with a Parks and Wildlife biologist. I do that here. You work with a Parks and Wildlife biologist. We go in, do surveys, and very similar, except it's a very tiny RMU. Do the surveys, and then that way we come up and say, okay, you were allowed this many doe, this many buck permit, based upon the size of the herd. Because 95, 96% of the state of Texas is privately owned, and there are no laws in the state of Texas that says that you can't fence your property off. That's what Parks and Wildlife came up with in order to remedy that situation. It sounds contradictory to the idea that wildlife is publicly owned if you could put a fence around your property and keep whatever's in there. It does sound counterproductive, but they're a citizen of the state of Texas, the same that you're a citizen of the state of Texas. And there is no law that says you cannot put a fence up. So there has to be some type of compromise put together And that's what we have as a compromise. Other than that, you can be a deer breeder, but you have to go through all of the permits and regulations and all such as that for deer breeding. And so that's, yeah, that's something, that's a little different. How many, are we through or?
No, you have about half an hour still.
All right, we can go back a little bit. All right, rehabilitation. Okay, that's just what I was talking about with the rehabilitation. So if I wanted to continue keeping the tortoises, I would have to be permitted to do it. If not, as soon as I sign my release from Parks and Wildlife, I am illegally holding tortoises. And I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a game warden that heard that I was about to retire, standing outside the door, waiting. No, I have a good relationship with our game wardens. As a matter of fact, sometime this weekend, I'm picking up 9 more Texas tortoises that were just recently confiscated from someone who's selling them. Yeah, so. But these are going to go down to a town called Charco in Central Texas or South Texas. And we're going to put them in a soft release enclosure. So it's this enclosure that is about 1 acre, 2 acres. Silk fence enclosure with hot wire around it. And so basically that's to give these tortoises enough time to kind of set up little territories and, disseminate out while protecting them from any type of predator that could get in. And then at a certain point, we'll start opening up parts of so we'll remove one side of the enclosure or remove the whole enclosure after about a year and a half. And so they can just slowly start making their way out. Yes.
So you said that they confiscated some who's selling them. What's the difference between them selling them and PetSmart? I know there's licensing, but what's the difference? Or what is
Texas tortoise is a protected species. Yes.
Petco can't sell them.
Texas tortoise is a protected species. Red-eared sliders are not a protected species. Red-eared sliders are everywhere. They're like the roach of the turtle. I didn't say that. They are. They're everywhere. As a matter of fact, in certain other states, they're an invasive species. Like in California, they're an invasive species. From being moved by places like Petco. You can buy little red-eared sliders at Petco, and I'm just like, why the hell would you want to buy a red-eared slider? That's like planting a tallow tree in the front yard. But they are native here, and there are certain laws, recently enacted laws in the state of Texas on the commercial collection and selling of turtles in the state of Texas. But we actually have multiple turtle species in the state of Texas that are protected. Some of which, like the chicken turtle, alligator snapping turtle, Texas tortoise, box turtles. They are looking at getting a protected status for box turtles. So there are, but the biggest thing with the Texas tortoise is they are a state threatened species. And they occur in Texas and northern Mexico, down to about Monterey, hour or two south of Monterey to the coast, and then up to Matagorda, about Matagorda Bay, in between Victoria and Corpus, and then draw a line from about in between Victoria and Corpus up to San Antonio and back down to Del Rio. That's the historical habitat of Texas tortoise. And so, yeah, I've got a place in Charco that I've already released 3 there. And so we're gonna try to, hopefully, if I can talk to the landowner, if he's for it, we're gonna release them there. If not, may take them to King Ranch, down further south into the valley. and release them. I think at this point, I think we just open to questions. So does anybody have questions? Because I'm essentially through. The rest of it is just more scenario, but I would rather have people ask questions about the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, I just read a book, and I'm sure a lot of people have read it here, Braided Sweetgrass. And in there, she talks about how the English language is about you're either a human or a thing. And so how do we help shape definitions and such culture within the Texas Master Naturalist to continue to evolve into, I guess, more of a neutral perception of life instead of humans here, wildlife here?
Well, the issue is, and hopefully this is not, there is no intent to offend anyone in the room. You are essentially trying, you're trying to battle against hundreds and hundreds of years of Western culture and Christianity, which proclaims that man has dominion over the animals. So you're basically fighting against a belief system that places human beings on a pedestal higher. And that's what I'm talking, that's what I was talking about earlier, which is something I really don't like to get into. And that's the idea of religion and politics, because a lot of it has to do with this idea that it has been in Western culture has been drilled into the psyche that we have been given dominion over the animals. Therefore, you have two things. You have humans and you have everything else, and everything else is there for our benefit and for our if they're our resource, it's there for us to exploit. It's there for us to do whatever we want to with it. So essentially, like I said, you're fighting against thousands of years of Western idea and Western culture. If you want to take on that.
Yeah, no, I think there's two to that, right? I think there's what religion actually stands for and then what people perceive religion as. And so, for instance, the Laudato Si is I guess it's somewhat of a chapter that the Catholic Church just came out with, saying that in fact we don't have dominion per se, or they're trying to redefine how
It's about respecting God's gifts, which our
Yes.
planet is God's gift, and we take care of our planet.
And the thing of that is, I don't, first and foremost, I don't think that all Christians think that they are greater than the world around them. I don't particularly, and I know that not all Christians believe that they are, and I'm not damning Christianity or Christians for doing it for anything. Every group, every religion is just as evil as the next. You know, no culture is immune from having a nasty past. None. They've all had somewhere in their past have had nasty dealings. If it's one tribe fighting with another tribe over this piece of land or that piece of land, every place, every culture, but then every place and every culture has contributed things too. You know, so I'm not in any way, shape, or form condemning any particular religion or any philosophy or any culture, but that is the prevailing idea of the Western thinking.
So I guess how does the Master Naturalist program?
I say the Master Naturalist program goes out and they do prairie restoration programs, and they do forest restoration and riparian restoration programs, and all such as that. And
how do we stay away from that? That's my question. How do we, and if so, can we identify whether the Texas Master Naturalist program is in fact following some of those cultural beliefs? And how do we change that? And is that a possibility?
No. I mean, when it comes down to, if it comes down to the whole, it comes down to the whole gestalt, it's very unlikely that you're going to change a person's philosophy or change a person's idea. You look at the fellow folks in this group, you find people that share the same philosophy as you do, and then you go out and, instead of not in my backyard, clean up your backyard. If you clean up your backyard and they do, 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 eventually, we'll start connecting a lot more of these fragmented habitats that we have throughout. I don't think necessarily tackling, I don't necessarily think that tackling the history of Western culture is something that is paramount to this particular group.
I think you said it best at the beginning, if we educate ourselves and then share that education, but
Absolutely.
that's how you're going to create a positive change.
If the education's culturally based on I'm superior than wildlife,
But that's what you gotta do. You gotta educate people about how we're not better than wildlife or vice versa.
Yeah, but
Just
We are, and
give back.
in a lot of my talks, I kind of emphasize things like this by saying that since man has removed the majority of apex predators in our ecosystem, we now have to become the apex predator. I do this in different talks. I give a bunch of different talks and a bunch of different different subjects. When we talk about restoration, I talk more about that and this idea that we are not outside of this ecosystem. We are not outside of it. We are part of it. What we have done in the past by removing all of our apex predators, we now have to take up that role as being the apex predator in certain instances. Hunting white-tailed deer, we have to. If we did not hunt white-tailed deer, we already have such a, I can't express the overabundance of white-tailed deer that we have. And if it were not us, people, taking on that role as the apex predator that we have removed, the red wolf, the mountain lion, coyote, etc., we have to then step into that role and show that, yes, we are all part of the ecosystem. We are all part of what's going on. Heat islands and cities. Well, gophers didn't build Houston, Javelina didn't build Houston. Collared lizards didn't build Las Vegas. We did, and yes, and we have made a major mark on the world as part of being part of this ecosystem. So I think the whole thing is, instead of challenging thousands of years of philosophy and thought, is just simply introducing a new idea and a new philosophy, and hopefully that idea sticks. Hopefully people will start to realize, yes, we are part of it. And, to an extent, yes, we do have dominion over the wildlife. We do. But it's how we choose to act on that. That's the right thing. Unfortunately, we got this, and we got these. And these gave us dominion over every damn thing on earth, pardon my language. And we just have to figure out how we use this and this to better things and not make it worse. And we have done that. That's why I implore people to watch Deep in the Heart. It's sobering, at the same time, it's enlightening. It shows us what our The issues we had in the past, the things we did wrong in the past, but it's also showing that, hey, we screwed up, but we can fix it. Is it going to be back to what it was in 1820 or whatever? No, it's not. And I've even argued at times that it didn't matter if it were white people or indigenous people or whatever, it still would end up here where we're at today. Because it's not just how the resource is used. You know what carrying capacity is? It's a point to where a species or an ecosystem reaches a level to where it can exist without destroying itself. So that's the K, that's the carry capacity. Everything within that ecosystem is within that carry capacity, but it's this point to where everything is equal. And so everything can exist without destroying the environment that it's in. And the problem is with people, we keep having more people and more people and more people. And we keep propping up our society.
Well, population is also not necessarily a problem, right?
Population is a huge issue.
Well, but you would say that like there are certain populations that don't consume as much trash as other populations do. Like for instance, in Texas, the trash per capita is 7 pounds per day.
But it takes as much as, and I've had this discussion too, and just recently, with the idea that especially urban folk have this idea that, they, which I commend them, hey, I'm all for it. They ride their bicycle to work. They live in a 300 square foot apartment. And they think, I live in a 300 square foot apartment and I ride my bike to work. Therefore, I have no effect on the earth. No, it takes 4 acres of land to support you for 1 year. 4 acres of land. Where is that 4 acres going to be? Is it your backyard? Is it your farm? Or is it going to be agribusiness in Nebraska or Mexico or Costa Rica or wherever it may be? The more people we have, the more acreage we need to support those people. That's just simply eating, That's just simply eating. It takes a lot of property. It takes a lot of land to support the people in this room. 7.8 million people in the greater Houston area. If you just take that as, let's just say 2 acres per person. 7.8 million people. It's a lot of acreage.
Yeah, but
Where's
the
that acreage
average
going to be?
worldwide also is the radical number of that is from people who consume more. So ultimately, people who consume more, who are in those developed societies that do consume more, shouldn't they have a bigger responsibility to?
I think everybody has a responsibility. You can't just pass responsibility off to everyone else. You have to take responsibility for yourself. You have to take responsibility for yourself. However, you feel you need to take responsibility for yourself, it may be different in the way that Bill feels that he needs to take responsibility for himself. We can't, we also have a culture that is, it's not my fault, it's your fault, it's somebody else's fault. I'm doing what I can. I'm better, I'm superior, because I'm not doing what you're doing. No, you take responsibility for yourself. And these people can take responsibility for their self. If you feel that these people are not taking a proper responsibility for themselves, educate them. Don't look down on them. Don't talk down to them. Don't say that I'm better than you. Don't say that, you're a MAGA redneck or whatever. No, educate them. Educate them to what you think. This is what we should do. And not just this is what we should do. This is why we should do it. Not, this is what you need to do. Because the first way to turn somebody off is telling somebody, Bill, you need to do this. First thing to do, if you start saying you need to do something, I'm not going to listen to you. We need to do this. We need to do that. And give people reason for it. I've advocated my whole life for the idea of we need to make the forest more valuable than the trees. Because as long as the trees in East Texas, where I grew up, excuse me, which is my backyard, which I hated seeing the longleaf pine and all of this being cut down from the time I was a little kid to today, I could take you to places that I grew up that are, it's horrible because now it's loblolly pine, which is really native to North Carolina, and slash pine that's native to North Carolina, not our native longleaf and shortleaf pine.
Well, like, wouldn't we say that that's also rooted in an individualistic society, that you worry about yourself and not worry about me? Like, for instance, I'll give you an example.
No, but what I'm saying about that is, if Bill does, if Bill is doing something one way, and you think that Bill is not doing it the right way, Bill isn't an ignorant redneck.
No, but I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Bill is someone that you could go up to and say, hey, to spread education, not, is to spread the idea of education and knowledge, not spreading a philosophy of you're right or I'm right and you're wrong.
Can I use an example? So I used to weigh, I actually ended up weighing 360 pounds at some point. And I visited a nutritionist in Venezuela, where I'm from. And the nutritionist says, you're fat and you're obese and you need to lose weight.
And that's what it took for you.
But let me, so then I actually visited a nutritionist here in the United States, and the nutritionist said, what do you want to do? And so it's a huge difference between, a social setting where people take responsibility over others and say, no, I have to call you out because you're doing something wrong. Whereas in an individual.
That's what it took for you. That's not what it takes for Bill.
No, I'm just analyzing the two different concepts. It's not about myself. It's about.
No, but what I'm saying is you said that it took somebody telling you you're fat before you did anything about it.
Not necessarily, because I still visited a nutritionist after the fact and I never did anything about it. So I'm not saying it wasn't successful.
So again, sorry, go ahead.
No, just, since everyone's going to be getting very straight about this, and we talked about it earlier.
Yes.
I didn't hear that HE where it is.
No, absolutely.
When can I-
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can go to HEB and you can buy groceries and you can wear your shirt and everything like that. And there is no rule about going to HEB and buying a 6-pack of, Bombshell Blonde from Southern Star. There's nothing, I can't with this on. I can't. But there's nothing with the Master Naturalist program that says that you cannot do that. Now, I highly, highly caution you on taking your 6-pack Bombshell Blonde and sitting in the parking lot of HEB and guzzling it and getting back, and slapping somebody on the butt as they walk by, because then you're violating the ethics that are set forth. And again, the ethics thing is very fluid. That's going to come down to, most likely it's going to come down to myself, Michelle, Richard, and a couple of other people in Austin to go, you're out. And I always say this, if you're having a Master Naturalist, like group something, you're going out and picking up trash on the Sweetleaf Nature Trail or something, and you all want to meet up at, the brewery afterwards. That's fine. Just bring an extra shirt with you. There's nothing that says, as a matter of fact, I'm going to B52 after this, and I've got an extra shirt in the car. I'm not wearing this. I'm brewery hopping while I'm up here. So, everybody knows I drink beer. I just can't do it while I'm wearing the shirt, where we used to actually could. But of course, some people showed their butt, literally. And we're no longer able to wear the shirts. Sorry, we can talk. I'd be more than happy to talk to you afterwards or whenever.
I have a legal curiosity about this education part. So if I'm an educator and I wanted to purchase a specimen to educate my class, I have to look for a source that is certified to be able to collect specimens. Like if I want to buy owl pellets,
Yes, you will have to, you could get them, you have to purchase them through a source. Technically, you have to purchase them through a source. Because under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act, you cannot own in whole or in part anything that has to do with a migratory or native bird of the state of Texas. Pellets are a little different because that's just regurgitated remains. Yeah, but if you're wanting a barred owl feather, then you have to have the proper permitting to own a barred owl bird feather or even a nest, even an abandoned nest. Because the abandoned nest contains feathers and things like that. Because you say, okay, well, why vomit but not a nest?
but I can't just go to like a science source website.
Likely you would not be able to purchase it from there. You would, and if you're going to purchase, you can purchase skins. And as long as you have the proper education permits and things that go along with that, then yes, you can purchase them through like Carolina. Yeah, there's different organizations, there's different places that you can get them from. Yeah, you would have to obtain them legally. You can't go out and trap a raccoon.
Into my backyard and.
Yeah, yeah. Even though it's in your backyard, I mean, there's still certain, and then there's even more regulation when it comes to eagle parts. So eagle parts are even a totally different story. So eagle feathers, all of that has to be, eagle feathers and all those things, they have to be turned over to the Department of the Interior. And then they are given to indigenous tribes for regalia or for, yeah. So those have to be given over to the Department of the Interior and those are turned over to native tribes. Yes.
Would that be the same like with the deer shed if you're swapping? You find one?
Deer shed are a little different.
Yeah, that's technically just.
Yeah, that's discarded bone. So I don't believe there is anything with that.
Collecting sometimes.
I know in some states it's illegal to pick up shed, like moose and elk. And that only came to light to me recently when you seen the video of the moose that was shedding his antlers. Yeah, that's where that came to light. That's like, I never knew that. It's like, yeah, they were saying, yeah, it's, you have to have a permit for moose and elk antlers in certain states. But white-tailed deer, I don't think there is anything with that. Now, if it's, if you go shoot a deer and cut the antlers off, that's different.
Yeah.
And they can, trust me, they can tell the difference between a sawed-off antler and one that was shed. Is it time to? Go ahead.
Are you familiar with, there's a book and website and Facebook, We Are the Ark?
No.
It's a very interesting, it's a group started in Ireland and now it's everywhere about rewilding your acre of the world.
Yes.
your corner of the world.
Yes.
And it's really interesting. The book is really good. I recommend it.
Yeah, there is a program, I believe it's Talamay that does it, Backyard National Park. Homegrown, yeah.
It's that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a neat program.
We are the art.
We Are the Ark, ARK. When you read the book, you have to kind of translate because she's in Ireland.
Yeah.
When she's talking about her garden, it's not where she grows her tomatoes. It's her backyard.
Yes. All right, cool. Anything else? I'm sorry?
Can you pick?
Yes, that's all wives' tale. Yeah,
I
That's-
said that
that-
on the email.
yeah, that's an old wives' tale that 99% of the bluebonnets that you see on the side of the road were planted. They're not wild. And 99% of the bluebonnets you see on the side of the road are not truly native bluebonnets. They are cultivated bluebonnets. Because if you see our native bluebonnet, it's not very impressive. Yeah.
They look very.
Yeah, they're little flowers. They're not these, because they have been grown specifically to throw on the side of the road to look pretty. And bluebonnets are not native to here either.
It's the hill country, right?
Yeah, it's hill country. It's a hill country flower.
And
Yeah,
there are snakes hiding in the bluebonnets.
and chiggers. I just relish. I drive by these folks. I love driving by these folks that are all crawling around out in the bluebonnets, just going, you're gonna be itching every
Oh,
part of your body
And they
for the
put their
next
little
week.
kids down
Yeah.
out looking for copperheads. I'm always like,
I'm just like, man, y'all gonna have chiggers like you wouldn't believe.
so nice.
Yeah.
Snakes in there. So what is your email address, Kelly?
Kelly, KELLY.NORRID @TPWD.Texas, spelled out TEXAS.gov.
Can you do that? Kelly, oh, well, and it's recorded too. It's kelly.norrid, NORRID @tpwd.texas.gov. So I think we did it. I think we've done laws. We're good. Oh,
No,
there was the
so,
final part.
One last question.
Hmm?
Last fall in Cypress County, there was a huge change in wildlife destruction. Yes. During breeding season for construction of the town lake projects.
Mhm.
You know, the status of that, it seems to have gone very quiet.
No, I don't. That is likely, if it's gonna be in Parks and Wildlife, is gonna be in a different department. It's gonna be in our Habitat Assessment Department. And number two, that's likely going to be a Fed problem. It's gonna be a Fed issue. Yeah, is anything like that, that's US Fish and Wildlife Service. So birds, US Fish and Wildlife Service. We do have state law that pretty much echoes I was gonna say Recovering America's Wildlife Act, that echoes the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We have state law that echoes that, but federal law takes precedence over that.
A lot of that.
Yeah. Yep, and so that's probably something that's gonna be more through our habitat assessment program. They deal with permitting and all of, yeah, so that, yeah, yes.
And heartbreaking. That's one of the things that I think kind of hits me the most and makes me want to be a natural, no.
Master,
Naturalist, a natural masterist. So it's when you hear about things like that and you think, well, I've got to do my own bit in my own backyard. And hopefully with all of us together, it's like the Homegrown National Park. We each do our own bit in our own backyard and it adds up.
yes.
So that's, I think, the best.
You would be surprised at just going home and talking to your spouse or whatever, your kids, or, going tonight to the brewery and talking to folks and just saying, hey, you know what I learned today? And how much of a difference that actually makes. How much of a difference your opinion actually really makes to people. It makes a big difference. And I would venture to say all of your opinions have changed slightly one way or the other since you've been in these classes. And hopefully after this class, you go home questioning everything. Because that's that's my point too of this presentation, is to make you question everything. Because isn't that the crux of science?
Right.
Is to question everything, have your opinion, have your idea, but question everything.
I have one
fun, too.
anecdote and then we're done. I promise. Wagging fingers. I help teach this program in prison. And I went in one time and the guy said, every time, he said, this program means so much to me. Every time I'm on the phone with my daughter up in Chicago, I tell her something new I've learned. So it's that each one teach one. If you can affect one person in your life, it becomes exponential. So come on, teach somebody. We're all done, guys. We'll see you next week.